Alone, Striking Man stands amid the aftermath of battle, placing his hands on the ground. He calls out, asking if anyone has survived. However, despite using his noise detection magic for a long time, he finds no response. It becomes clear that he is the sole survivor of the clash. This man is the High Priest, the one who once united the demons and brought humanity to the brink of collapse. In the end, he was defeated only because a warrior from the demonic realm and the mages of the White Tower risked everything to stop him. Soon after, Edna Sol Laplace, the final dragon and a neutral observer who records history, arrives and confirms the High Priest's death. She meets the White Tower's master and delivers grave news. The demonic army has invaded the tower, resulting in heavy losses, widespread destruction, and the near-total loss of valuable research. However, she also shares a small hope. The Imperial forces arrived in time to rescue a few survivors, including the Master's disciples. Though on the verge of death, the Tower Master feels relieved. When asked if he regrets his choices, he firmly denies it, standing by those he guided. However, in his final moments, he quietly admits that while he was a great mage, he failed as a leader. If given another chance, he would choose to live differently, even if it meant being seen as selfish, just to protect his people. With that, the White Tower's master, Oscar Sage, passes away. Edna records his death, honoring the sacrifices made that day. The scene then shifts to a room in the White Tower, where a blue-haired mage is tending to a black-haired man. Suddenly, the man awakens in shock, knocking over a glass of water. Confused and disoriented, he soon realizes something impossible. He is Oscar Sage, and despite clearly remembering his death, he is somehow alive again. As he tries to understand the situation, an elder named Maxim storms in, furious at the sight of him awake. Tension rises as Maxim attempts to strike him, but Oscar instinctively casts a wind shield, suspecting danger. However, the spell collapses instantly, and in that moment, Oscar realizes a shocking truth. His magic has become incredibly weak. Elder Maxim notices Oscar's wind shield, and, instead of attacking, praises his effort. He decides to postpone any punishment regarding the misuse of research funds, allowing Oscar time to recover before leaving. Once he's gone, Frank, clearly shaken, questions Oscar's behavior. However, Oscar is more concerned about his condition. His mana circuits, capacity, and purity are all severely degraded, making him doubt if this is truly his body. When Oscar asks how long he has been unconscious, Frank reveals it has only been about a day, contradicting Oscar's expectation of months. Trying to understand the situation, Oscar asks about familiar names like Lloyd, Gilly, and Sasha, but Frank is confused by his tone and references. He explains that Lloyd betrayed the White Tower and joined the Red Tower, while Gilly fled after stealing a high-level spellbook. Even more shocking, Sasha is now the Tower Master, no longer a child, but a 25-year-old adult. Overwhelmed, Oscar looks outside and realizes the world has drastically changed. Advanced magic engineering has transformed the city, confirming that 20 years have passed since his death. He then pieces together the truth. He has reincarnated into the body of Oscar Krzyzyn, a 20-year-old, low-level mage from a fallen noble family. Reviewing the body's memories, Oscar learns that Krzyzyn had taken an illegal elixir to boost his mana, which led to his collapse. While the elixir did increase raw mana, it came at a deadly cost. Upon closer inspection, Oscar discovers traces of poison hidden within the mana itself. He concludes that the previous Oscar didn't die from a mana overload, but from deliberate poisoning, something far too sophisticated to target a mere level 1 mage. Realizing this, Oscar understands that someone orchestrated this from the shadows. Now given a second chance at life, he decides to live on his own terms, and as repayment for this body, he resolves to uncover the truth and take revenge for the one who was wronged. On the outskirts of Surin, inside a mansion, a worker reports to his boss that their shop has been completely destroyed from the inside by a White Tower mage. The attacker was specifically asking about the person who sold him the elixir. While they suspect it was Oscar, the boss finds it hard to believe. After all, a mere theory mage shouldn't be capable of defeating their men so easily. The underling expresses concern that the White Tower might launch an investigation, but the boss dismisses it. According to him, the person who supplied the elixir was wearing a White Tower ring, making it appear as though the request came from one of their own. In his view, This provides enough cover to avoid suspicion. Unbeknownst to them, Oscar is already inside, silently listening. He finds the situation suspicious. No one would reveal their true identity so carelessly. By tracing the faint scent left in the elixir bottle, he has already concluded that far more people are involved in this scheme than he initially thought. Revealing himself, Oscar calmly confirms that he was the one who destroyed their shop and orders them to continue their earlier conversation. The boss lets out a heavy sigh, stating that he had considered letting Oscar go if he pretended to hear nothing. But now, he has no choice but to eliminate him. At his command, an underling draws his sword and rushes forward. This time, Oscar doesn't hold back. He casts Windbreaker, instantly killing the attacker. Even so, Oscar notes that his current power is still lacking, as the result isn't as overwhelming as he expected. Shocked by how easily his man was defeated, the shop owner immediately pulls out a firearm and shoots at Oscar. This catches Oscar's interest. He cannot detect any mana within the attack, yet it carries significant power. He begins to wonder what principle allows such force without magic. To the shop owner's disbelief, Oscar effortlessly stops the bullets midair and sends them back, knocking the man to the ground. As he approaches, Oscar calmly explains that he has already cast a sound-binding spell, ensuring that no one else in the building can hear or come to help. With the situation under control, Oscar begins his interrogation. Sitting down, he asks about the person who arranged the deal involving the elixir. The shop owner initially refuses to speak, prompting Oscar to apply pressure, using wind magic internally to create intense pain, forcing a response without unnecessary harm. Unable to endure it, the shop owner finally gives in and agrees to tell everything. He explains that their patron provided both the elixir and payment, instructing them to sell it to Oscar at a low price. When asked about the patron's appearance, he admits that the individual wore a hood, hiding their face, but was clearly wearing a white tower ring, likely a deliberate attempt to mislead. However, one detail stands out. The patron carried a distinct scent, something fresh and mint-like. Oscar takes note of this, recognizing it as a valuable clue. Continuing the interrogation, Oscar asks how they plan to handle the aftermath of his death. The shop owner explains that the White Tower is currently preoccupied with withdrawing from the 4 major magic towers, making a proper investigation unlikely. This confuses Oscar, prompting him to demand further clarification. In response, the shop owner hands over documents detailing the situation. The records explain that the White Tower established a festival known as the Day of the White Knight, commemorating the death of the High Priest. On this day, the Emperor honors Oscar Sage's sacrifice by granting the tower significant benefits, including a 30-year tax exemption. However, despite this recognition, the White Tower has produced the worst results among the 4 major magic towers in recent years. Ever since its devastating losses 20 years ago, it has failed to recover. An important announcement from the imperial family is expected at this year's festival, and experts have already pointed out that the tower's greatest weakness is its lack of advanced magic. Hearing this, Oscar grows troubled. He clearly remembers entrusting critical documents to Edna to prevent such a decline. Determined to understand what went wrong, he decides to investigate further. The shop owner then explains the broader situation. Among the 4 major magic towers, the Eastern Yellow Tower, known for its mastery over lightning, has led the rise of the magic engineering era. Their innovations have revolutionized daily life, introducing technologies such as streetlights and vehicles, leaving the White Tower far behind in both influence and success. The shop owner continues explaining the state of the other magic towers. The Southern Blue Tower dominates industries like drinking water, agriculture, and potions. The Western Red Tower, known for its harsh desert origins, focuses on combat operations, assisting in missions such as monster subjugation. Meanwhile, while the other towers run massive, high-profit industries, the White Tower has been reduced to handling delivery work. Hearing this sends chills down Oscar's spine. The White Tower, once revered for its mages who soared through the skies with freedom and pride, comparable to dragons and eagles, has now fallen so far that it relies on delivery services simply because its mages can fly faster and more efficiently than others. The realization infuriates him. This decision, he learns, was enforced by the current Tower Master, his own former disciple. As the explanation continues, Oscar discovers that industries like water supply, agriculture, and potions were once the White Tower's greatest sources of income. However, the Blue Tower now holds a monopoly over the potion market. 20 years ago, the White Tower led that field, but all their potion-making knowledge was lost when their research was destroyed. The shop owner further explains that the water business now involves selling purified drinking water at high prices and even providing artificial rain to drought-stricken regions. Oscar struggles to understand why people would pay so much for water when wells exist, but the shop owner clarifies that this trend is largely driven by wealthy elites. In short, the White Tower can no longer compete financially with the other towers. Their rivals operate on an entirely different scale, and with only 7 months remaining until the White Night Festival, this is effectively their last chance to prove their worth. Suddenly, the shop owner begins to collapse, overwhelmed by pain from his injuries. Oscar briefly considers saving him, but after reviewing the man's records and uncovering his numerous crimes, he decides otherwise and walks away. By dawn, Oscar returns to his room, exhausted from using only a few basic spells. Sitting down to rest, he attempts to use Wind Archive, the powerful magic that once made him the greatest mage in history. However, in his current condition, he cannot sustain it at all. Realizing his limitations, Oscar decides to first understand his body completely. He begins with a detailed magical scan while reviewing information about the previous owner of this body, Oscar Krzyzyn, the heir of Count Krzyzyn and the sole survivor of a devastating mansion fire. From a young age, he was recognized as a prodigy in the magic world. His talent was so extraordinary that multiple factions competed to recruit him. During his 6 years at the Empire Academy's magic faculty, he consistently achieved perfect scores and even published a groundbreaking thesis that solidified his reputation as a genius. However, despite all that brilliance, he was believed to suffer from mana deficiency syndrome. Without it, he would have undoubtedly become one of the greatest mages of his generation. Now, everything starts to make sense. The previous Oscar possessed unmatched theoretical understanding of magic, but lacked the ability to use it. Finally, the scan is complete, and what Oscar discovers shocks him to his core. The previous Oscar never had mana deficiency syndrome at all. His mana circuits had been deliberately sealed. Mana deficiency syndrome, just as the name suggests, is a condition in which a person cannot properly circulate or accumulate mana. Normally, a mage can install up to 20 physical circuits in addition to their core mana circuit, and the number of these circuits determines their overall level. However, for someone with this condition, the foundational system is incomplete, making it nearly impossible to progress beyond level 3, no matter how hard they train. But Oscar Krzyzyn's case is different. His circuits were not naturally defective. They had been deliberately sealed by someone. If the previous Oscar truly was a genius, then he must have already known this. With that thought in mind, Oscar heads to the library, searching for a diary or any clue that might reveal the truth. According to Frank, Oscar Krzyzyn had a pretty bad reputation as a mage. However, Oscar begins to suspect that this may have been nothing more than a carefully crafted persona. Perhaps, knowing that someone was targeting him, he intentionally acted like a reckless mage to lower suspicion. If that's true, then it also explains why he resorted to the illegal elixir. With no one he could trust, he had no choice but to try and break the seal on his own. Unlike him, however, Oscar believes he can succeed. He only needs to untangle the knot binding the circuits. While gathering books for research, Oscar comes across a text titled A Reinterpretation of Basic Magic, filled with detailed notes. As he flips through the pages, he notices sections that have been carefully marked and studied. The deeper he reads, the more he realizes something astonishing. Every theory and concept written inside is accurate. Even without being able to use magic, the previous Oscar had simulated countless experiments purely in his mind and arrived at correct conclusions. At that moment, Oscar fully understands why he was called a genius. In terms of theoretical understanding, the two of them are remarkably similar. More importantly, it becomes clear that the previous Oscar never gave up on magic. On the contrary, he worked harder than anyone else. His notes reflect an overwhelming passion, a love for magic that never faded. Then, Oscar finds a message written in the book. It states that the previous Oscar was about to attempt his greatest challenge. This confirms it. He knew everything. And yet, he had to face it all alone. A young mage, burdened by a cruel fate, who never broke and quietly walked a lonely path. Understanding this, Oscar makes a firm vow. As the 17th Master of the Magic Tower, He swears to undo the knot that the previous Oscar could not. Sitting down, he prepares himself for the task, and makes another promise as well. Those who destroyed the previous Oscar's life will be held accountable. Exhausted from analyzing the sealed circuits, Oscar eventually falls asleep. But the moment he does, he finds himself standing in a garden. There, he sees his past self, teaching his young disciples. Instantly, he realizes what's happening. This is the effect of the curse placed on him by a nightmare viscount from the demon realm. Because of that curse, every time he sleeps, he is forced to relive fragments of his past. He had hoped that the curse would disappear after taking over a new body, but it seems to be bound to his soul, not his physical form. Still, there is a small sense of relief. This memory is not painful. It shows his disciples before they were changed by time and hardship. In the memory, Oscar is explaining the magic system. He teaches that both mages and knights use power that can be broadly divided into 4 categories: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special types. While magic may appear similar on the surface, its core nature differs based on these classifications. The White Tower, he explains, specializes in balance-type magic. Among the children listening are Lloyd Schultz, only 9 years old at the time, Sasha Maist, just 5, and Gilead Dominic, who is 7. Oscar continues, explaining how each tower focuses on different strengths. The Golden Tower prioritizes speed, specializing in acceleration-type magic. The Red Tower focuses on raw power, representing enhancement-type magic. Meanwhile, both the Azure and White Towers emphasize balance. At one point, young Gilead confidently declares that he wants to choose acceleration-type magic. However, Oscar gently corrects him. Magic type isn't something you choose, it's something you're born with. To demonstrate, Oscar draws a magic circle and asks Sasha to try it first. She follows his instructions, and the result reveals that she possesses balance-type magic, the same as Oscar. Delighted by this, Sasha beams with excitement. Next, Gilead steps forward and performs the test himself, discovering that he indeed has acceleration-type magic, just as he had hoped. Lloyd is revealed to possess special-type magic. Disappointed, he asks Oscar if it's possible to change one's magic type after it has been determined. Oscar explains that special types are extremely rare, making up only about 0.2% of all mages. Curious, he asks Lloyd why he wants to change it. Although it isn't possible, Lloyd honestly admits that he simply wanted to have the same magic type as his master. Hearing this, Oscar playfully responds that, since Lloyd is so rare, he will receive the most private lessons out of everyone. He even pretends to worry about finding a way to change magic types. This immediately cheers Lloyd up, and he eagerly asks Oscar to promise him those extra lessons. The two seal it with a pinky promise. Watching this memory unfold fills Oscar with warmth. It reminds him why Lloyd was once called the Promise Man. No matter how mature he tried to act, he was still just a child. Oscar suddenly wakes up to a loud announcement, instructing him to report to Lab 4202. By this point, Oscar has unlocked 12 out of 20 physical circuits. In the process, he has also gained 2 additional mana circuit lines, advancing himself to level 2. Arriving at the lab, he finds Elder Maxim waiting at his desk. Maxim asks about Oscar's condition and briefly mentions his memories. Before Oscar's reincarnation, Maxim had actually been his junior. Now 45 years old, he was once a diligent and sincere mage whom Oscar believed would have a bright future. Oscar can't help but smile, recalling how Maxim used to follow him around, calling him Senior, and later Magic Tower Master, something Oscar always found endearing. Seeing Oscar suddenly laugh, Maxim is left confused. Getting straight to the point, he brings up a report regarding the deaths of the Gordon family's head and acting leader. He then asks Oscar if he has anything to explain. Oscar calmly states that they were killed after attempting to assassinate him. This shocks Maxim, prompting Oscar to present the evidence, commission fees, a ledger, and the elixir connected to the incident. He explains that he initially went to confront them, but the situation escalated when they tried to kill him. After reviewing the ledger and confirming the recovered money, Maxim determines that Oscar's account is credible. Based on the evidence, he officially closes the case as self-defense. With that settled, Oscar requests a personal favor. He wants to meet the current Magic Tower Master. Maxim explains that this wouldn't normally be difficult, as he often discusses magic with Sasha. However, she is currently away on an important commission and won't return for another 6 months. The fact that the Tower Master is handling such minor tasks highlights the absence of higher-level mages. Oscar also learns that Sasha is currently only level 7. At her age, he had already reached level 9, and given her talent, she should have at least reached level 8 by now. Changing the topic, Maxim asks if Oscar has been practicing attack magic again. Oscar casually replies that he trains whenever he feels like it. Satisfied, Maxim dismisses him. After Oscar leaves, the Vice Master of the White Magic Tower, Hemel Glimwitz, arrives. He advises Maxim not to be too harsh on Oscar. However, Maxim isn't easily convinced. He knows that even basic wind shield magic couldn't be refined to that level in just a day or two. This leads him to believe that Oscar has been secretly training for quite some time. The two then head off to attend an elders meeting. Meanwhile, Oscar makes his way to the 10th floor, the very garden he saw in his dream. Compared to his memories, the place now feels empty and quiet. As he walks through it, a gardener notices him and respectfully greets him as young Master Oscar. Curious, Oscar asks who he is. The man introduces himself as Walter, the caretaker of the Magic Tower's facilities. Realizing the rumors are true, Walter notes that Oscar seems to have lost his memories. He gently mentions that they used to spend time chatting together in this very garden. Oscar asks why Walter addresses him as young master. In response, Walter explains that he has been working at the White Tower since the time of the previous master, the great Oscar Sage. Hearing this, Oscar feels a quiet sense of satisfaction and decides to embrace the title. He then asks Walter to continue being his conversation partner. Although touched by the offer, Walter declines. He reveals that he will soon be leaving the tower after 40 years of service. Concerned, Oscar asks if something is wrong. Walter explains that during his time at the tower, he has served under 3 different masters, while his co-workers have gradually left over the years. Now, he is the only one remaining in his department. The reason he endured for so long was because of something the former master, Oscar Sage, once said during his appointment ceremony, that everyone in the tower should live with pride as members of the White Tower. Those words stayed with him all his life. However, it is precisely because of that pride that Walter has decided to leave. Confused, Oscar questions why such a meaningful belief would lead to his resignation. Walter calmly explains that the tower is no longer in a stable condition. Even the budget for maintaining basic facilities has been significantly reduced. Next month will mark Walter's 40th year at the tower. At that moment, Oscar realizes the real issue, the long service award. All non-mage staff members of the White Tower are entitled to a medal and a monetary reward upon completing 20 and 40 years of service. For 40 years, the reward amounts to 200,000 bells, enough to buy a house in most major cities. But Walter is worried that the current White Tower cannot afford such a payment. To honor that obligation, the tower would have to take on dangerous commissions and risk even more lives just to gather the necessary funds. Unable to accept that burden, Walter chooses to step away. To him, the White Tower is more than a workplace. It is his second home, and he cannot bring himself to strain it further. Hearing this, Oscar is shaken. He hadn't realized just how dire the tower's situation had become. He had always believed that other towers, like the Azure Tower, were simply pursuing wealth excessively. But now he understands. Those towers thrive because they have already secured overwhelming financial success. In contrast, all Oscar has are titles like War Hero and Savior of Humanity. Yet those titles mean nothing now if the tower cannot even support the people who have dedicated their entire lives to it. Lost in thought, Oscar clenches his fists tightly until Walter notices and gently calls out to him. As Walter carefully bandages his hands, Oscar learns that he plans to leave in just 2 weeks. At that moment, Oscar makes a firm decision. He tells Walter to stay, that he should continue being his conversation partner and remain at the White Tower. With determination in his voice, Oscar promises that he will restore the tower's prosperity and ensure that something like this never happens again. Back in his room, Oscar reflects on the bold promise he just made. The problem is, he has no clear plan yet. The only options that come to mind are research, lectures, and commissions, but those either take too long to generate income or require a higher level of power than he currently possesses. At level 2, he simply doesn't have the luxury of time. What he needs is a business that can generate massive profit quickly. As he thinks it through, one idea stands out: potions. While going through a newspaper, he comes across a piece of information that immediately catches his attention. The scene then shifts to the Vice Tower Master's office, where the elders are gathered to discuss Oscar's embezzlement. Fidenlina, the elder in charge of finances, is furious and demands strict punishment. However, Elder Maxim argues that the situation is already under control, as Oscar has shown signs of remorse. This only angers her further. As the argument escalates, Fidenlina suggests placing Oscar into isolation training as punishment. The Vice Tower Master, observing the heated exchange, can't help but question how two elders nearing their 50s could argue like this. He steps in and firmly rejects the idea, stating that such training would be excessive. Instead, he proposes that Oscar repay 3 times the amount of the misused research funds. Even so, Fidenlina remains unsatisfied. The discussion then shifts to a far more pressing issue, the tower's financial crisis. With funds running dangerously low, a decision must be made soon. Fidenlina suggests selling the equipment from the potion production chamber, which would allow them to survive for another 3 months. Otherwise, the White Tower may be forced to shut down entirely. The Vice Tower Master immediately opposes this idea. He reminds them that the White Tower is a place for mages to study and share knowledge. Selling off their core infrastructure would be equivalent to sacrificing their future just to survive the present. Fidenlina coldly questions whether the White Tower even has a future left. They have waited 20 years for a miracle, and none has come. Even if a genius exists somewhere, she believes no one will come to save them. Just as the Vice Tower Master is about to respond, there's a knock on the door. Oscar enters and greets the elders before getting straight to the point. He proposes starting a business. This immediately irritates Fidenlina. From her perspective, Oscar has already misused funds, and now he's suggesting another risky venture that could waste even more resources. Ignoring her reaction, Oscar turns to the Vice Tower Master and brings up an article he read. The Vince estate has recently gone into lockdown due to a severe flu outbreak. The Vice Tower Master confirms the news and adds that there are rumors it could be the Cadena flu, a highly dangerous illness with no known cure. In the past, the White Tower had developed a vaccine for it, so it was never a major threat. However, that formula was lost 20 years ago during the tower's downfall. Even the Azure Tower, which now dominates the potion industry, has failed to recreate it despite years of effort. And that's exactly where Oscar sees an opportunity. He declares his plan to produce and sell a vaccine for the Cadena flu. It's something the White Tower once monopolized, and now he intends to reclaim that position. However, Fidenlina dismisses the idea immediately. In her eyes, the plan isn't even worth considering. For the past 20 years, countless magic towers and pharmaceutical groups have invested immense time and resources into recreating the vaccine, and all of them have failed. Fidenlina firmly believes there is no way a 20-year-old like Oscar could succeed where countless experts have failed. In response, Oscar confidently states that while everyone else may have failed, he is a genius, and he won't. His bold claim only angers her further. She continues criticizing him, pointing out the losses he has already caused the White Tower. Before things escalate, the Vice Tower Master steps in and tells her to remain professional. Regardless of her role in managing finances, Oscar has presented a formal investment proposal as a mage of the White Tower, and it deserves to be treated seriously. Realizing her tone crossed a line, Fidenlina composes herself and offers an apology. Oscar, in turn, acknowledges why she dislikes him so much. Over the past 2 years, he hasn't achieved anything meaningful. Even so, he reassures the Vice Tower Master that he is confident in his plan and urges him to consider it carefully. The Vice Tower Master then asks the key question: what makes Oscar so certain that the outbreak is indeed Cadena flu? This is exactly what Oscar was waiting for. He directs them to the second page of the newspaper, pointing out an unusual development involving Archbishop Baldwin of the El Terra Order. Until now, the Archbishop had consistently stayed in major cities for about a month during his pilgrimage. However, his recent change in plans raises suspicion. The El Terra Order, which worships the Mother of Earth, Terra, has only 7 archbishops. As leaders of the order, they are expected to be dignified and incorruptible. In reality, however, their position often involves political maneuvering, especially for those aiming to become cardinals, a rank that requires significant financial backing. Oscar begins connecting the dots. During their pilgrimage, archbishops are allowed to stay in each estate for up to a month, primarily to meet nobles and merchants and secure funding. However, Surin, once a prosperous city, is now in decline. While the elders initially assumed the extended stay is for prayers and blessings, Oscar points out that this makes the situation even more suspicious. There is little reason to spend so much time praying over a deteriorating region. He then outlines the pilgrimage route: Surin, followed by Mosque, Melbourne, Greenwale, and finally Vince. The pattern is clear. Archbishop Baldwin stayed in Knox for a month before arriving in Surin, and he is expected to spend a full month in each of the following cities as well. This effectively delays his visit to Vince as much as possible. At that moment, the elders understand Oscar's reasoning. If a major incident, like an epidemic, were to occur during the Archbishop's visit, it could be interpreted as divine punishment from the Mother of Earth. Such a scandal could destroy his chances of becoming a cardinal. By delaying his arrival, he avoids that risk. Even Fidenlina can't help but acknowledge the sharpness of Oscar's analysis. The Vice Tower Master is convinced as well, but there's still a problem. Officially supporting Oscar's plan would strain the already fragile finances of the White Tower, leaving them unable to support other mages. Instead, he makes a personal decision. He offers his own savings, 30,000 bells, as funding for Oscar's project. Although grateful, Oscar is inwardly concerned. The amount is far from sufficient. Still, he accepts it and heads straight to the potion production chamber, deciding to move forward with a backup plan. If he can create even a single vaccine sample, he can use it to secure funding directly from the Archbishop. For now, Frank assists him with the preparations. Putting on his glasses, Oscar begins his work. Oscar begins working on the potion, but before attempting anything complex, he creates a simple energy drink as practice. He had been worried about his skills in this new body, but the result proves that his concerns were unnecessary. Meanwhile, Frank gathers all the medicinal herbs Oscar requests. Exhausted from the task, he asks for something to drink and hands over the receipt. Without hesitation, Oscar gives him a fatigue recovery potion, even though it's quite expensive, and takes the receipt. After drinking it, Frank immediately feels refreshed. Oscar inspects the ingredients and finds that their quality is exceptional. Frank proudly explains that he personally selected the best ones, even frustrating the seller in the process. Impressed, Oscar jokingly suggests that Frank might be better suited to becoming a merchant than a mage. Frank laughs and admits he's considered it, especially if the White Tower goes bankrupt. Before he can finish that thought, Oscar cuts him off, clearly unwilling to hear it. When Frank asks what to do next, mentioning that Elder Fidenlina assigned him to assist, Oscar gives him instructions to help organize the materials. Although Oscar doesn't truly need an assistant, he recalls reading about talented but troublesome individuals within the tower, people with great potential who lack direction. If guided properly, they could become valuable assets. Frank Sirius is one of them. As they arrange the ingredients, Frank notices something concerning. Many of the herbs are poisonous. Black lilies of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and merva leaves are all known toxins. Oscar calmly explains that being poisonous doesn't make them unusable. In fact, with the right method, they can become powerful medicine. Frank mentions the standard detoxification process, boiling the herbs in water for around 12 hours. Oscar confirms this, but points out a major flaw. The process also removes most of the nutrients. To solve this, he introduces a better method, using a steamer. By steaming the herbs instead of boiling them, they can retain up to 98% of their nutrients. They begin the process, placing the ingredients into the steamer until they soften, making detoxification easier. Then, Oscar casts an air drain spell, gathering the steam into a concentrated sphere. From there, the toxins are carefully separated. Oscar instructs Frank to observe closely. By precisely combining 23% red camellias and 47% merva leaves, along with the other refined components, he successfully creates a remedy for the Cadena flu. Frank is stunned by how straightforward the process appears. Curious, Oscar asks him to try it himself. However, it's not as easy as it looks. Frank struggles. He cannot yet use multiple spells simultaneously, a skill typically mastered at level 4 or 5. As a level 3 mage, he hesitates to admit this. Seeing this, Oscar decides to teach him a technique. He explains that dual casting isn't some hidden secret. It's simply about dividing one's focus. By imagining the mind as split into separate sections, a mage can handle different spells at the same time, one on the left, one on the right. Following these instructions, Frank tries again and succeeds. He's shocked by how simple it feels and wonders why such knowledge was never shared. Oscar explains the truth. Many mages hoard techniques out of pride and greed, refusing to teach what they struggled to learn. Over time, this became an unspoken tradition. But on real battlefields, such thinking only leads to failure. Survival depends on sharing knowledge and learning together. For the White Tower to recover, it must embrace collaboration and open teaching. Inspired, Frank quickly adapts, and astonishingly, he manages to create the vaccine on his very first attempt. Excited, he immediately begins gathering more ingredients to produce additional doses. To speed things up, Oscar decides to use a larger steamer, allowing them to process everything at once. After several hours of work, they successfully produce a total of 514 bottles of the vaccine. Just then, Elder Maxim rushes in with urgent news. He informs Oscar that the Azure Towers pharmaceutical company, NewTek, is scheduled to meet Archbishop Baldwin in just 1 hour. If they secure the contract first, Oscar's vaccine could become irrelevant. The situation looks dire, and both Frank and Maxim are visibly discouraged. But Oscar remains calm. He points out that the Cadena flu is classified as a B-rank disaster, which means there's still an opportunity. With that in mind, he quickly sets a new plan into motion and gives Elder Maxim specific instructions. The scene then shifts to a lodging in Surin, where representatives from NewTek arrive for their meeting with Archbishop Baldwin. Among them are Moira Main, a level 5 mage from the Azure Tower, and Neil Bryan, the managing director of NewTek. After exchanging greetings, they sit down and get straight to business. The Archbishop asks about their progress on a Cadena flu solution. Moira confidently explains that development is underway, but they still need to complete clinical trials. After that, they must obtain approval from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration. In total, the process will take nearly 6 months. Hearing this, Archbishop Baldwin grows visibly frustrated. He is scheduled to depart for Vince in just 4 months, time he clearly doesn't have. At that moment, a knock interrupts the meeting. A servant informs him that another mage has arrived requesting an audience. Confused, Baldwin asks Moira why she didn't mention anyone else accompanying them. She immediately denies it, stating that no one else came with them. Suspicious, Baldwin allows the visitor to enter. The door opens, and standing there is none other than Oscar, the White Tower mage. Calmly stepping inside, he greets the Archbishop and introduces himself, stating that he has come with an offer worth considering. Archbishop Baldwin furrows his brow and asks why a mage from the White Tower has come all the way here. Calmly, Oscar reveals his purpose. He has come to negotiate the sale of the Cadena flu cure. Baldwin notes the timing is perfect, pointing out that the Azure Tower's representatives are also present for the same purpose. Oscar, however, remains unfazed. He explains that the Azure Tower isn't fully prepared yet, but the White Tower is ready to negotiate immediately. Moira, the Azure Tower mage, erupts in anger, insisting that Oscar is lying. After all, the White Tower supposedly lacks the money and technology to develop a cure. Baldwin, sensing her point, asks Oscar for proof. Without hesitation, Oscar presents a sample of the cure. The Archbishop's expression brightens, impressed by the quality. He immediately inquires about production capacity and deadlines if the negotiations move forward. Moira seethes, watching another Tower's mage gain the Archbishop's attention. Baldwin, however, humbles her with a simple gesture, keeping the discussion professional. Moira tries to regain control, pointing out that the White Tower doesn't have permission from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration, and asks Oscar if he does. When Oscar admits he doesn't, Moira smirks, thinking she now has an edge. She boasts about the Azure Tower's long history, assuring Baldwin that their treatment will be the best in history. Oscar, however, can't stay silent. Amused, he interjects, reminding everyone that the White Tower was established 5 years before the Azure Tower, 5 years that no Azure Tower master has been able to close, even in 10,000 years. He emphasizes the White Tower's historical monopoly over the magic medicine market. Moira scoffs, calling it ancient history, which only fuels Oscar's anger. He exudes an overwhelming aura, enough to terrify her, clearly beyond what a level 2 mage should be capable of. The argument is interrupted when the Archbishop's servant rushes in with a call from the Lord of Vince. The Lord expresses gratitude, explaining that the White Tower's elders secretly provided the cure, and now all the Cadena flu patients have been cured in just a few hours. Baldwin asks about potential side effects, but there are none. The Lord of Vince requests the next batch, and Baldwin realizes Oscar's strategy. The White Tower has effectively positioned itself as the indispensable provider. Moira protests, claiming this violates imperial medical regulations. Oscar calmly corrects her, explaining that war laws apply in this situation. The Archbishop and Moira look puzzled. Oscar continues, 20 years ago, during the Demon War, a pandemic weapon caused countless deaths. Even with mages producing treatments, the approval process by the imperial authorities took too long, and thousands died before they could receive a cure. Now, the White Tower is prepared to act immediately, using the laws of war to bypass bureaucratic delays, a bold move that underscores Oscar's ingenuity and the Tower's resurgence. That's why His Majesty added a clause to Article 42, Clause 8, stating that treatments intended for the wounded in times of war would be categorized as special treatments and would not be subject to the Empire's medical authority regulations. Moira immediately objects, claiming they are not at war. Calmly, Oscar explains that there are 3 cases where a situation is considered a war. First, an ongoing conflict against another species or nation. Second, a revolution. And third, a disaster classified as B rank or higher. Since the Cadena flu is a B-class natural disaster, there is no need to follow the medical authorities' laws. Moira is left speechless, but Neil steps in, claiming they can do the same, and quickly sends their treatment to Archbishop Baldwin. However, the race is already over. The moment the White Tower's cure reached Vince, victory was secured. Moreover, the Lord of Vince believes Archbishop Baldwin is working with the White Tower, so he cannot backtrack and claim it was the Azure Tower instead. Neil suggests lowering the price, but this only angers Baldwin further, who sees it as an attempt to buy his favor. He orders them to leave immediately. Moira rises, clenching his fists, threatening Oscar as he departs. Before he can leave, Oscar calmly informs him that he has already registered the patent for the treatment and vaccine with the palace. If the Azure Tower wants to sell their version, they must pay royalties to the White Tower, or risk being shut out. Enraged, Moira storms out. Neil greets Baldwin and then Oscar, and as he passes by, a familiar scent catches Oscar's attention. A refreshing, clear mint smell, the same scent the underworld boss had mentioned. Recognizing it, Oscar chooses to remain silent for the moment. Baldwin invites Oscar to sit so they can discuss further details. The conversation turns to pricing. Baldwin reveals that the Azure Tower in Newtek had requested 2 million bells for their cure. Oscar smiles confidently and announces he will sell it for 5 million bells, surprising the Archbishop. A few hours later at the White Tower, Oscar hands a check for 10 million bells to Fidenlina, leaving her speechless. After a moment, she smiles and compliments him, saying she knew he could do it. The Vice Master also examines the check, bewildered at the amount, knowing Baldwin would never authorize such a sum. Oscar calmly explains that the extra money comes from advertising fees he added to the deal, showcasing his cunning and strategic foresight. According to the official statement from the White Magic Tower, Archbishop Baldwin had seemingly predicted the Cadena flu outbreak, as if he had received a revelation from the Earth Mother. For someone aiming for the next cardinal seat, the title of an archbishop, blessed with revelation, was an irresistible temptation. Impressed by Oscar's offer, Baldwin signed the contract for 10 million bells, far exceeding the initial suggestion. In return, the White Tower promised not only to deliver the vaccines, but also a second batch of the cure within a week. The Vice Master couldn't help but praise Oscar's ingenuity. The original punishment had been for Oscar to repay 3 times the embezzled research funds, but instead, he returned 400 times that amount. The Vice Master withdrew the punishment entirely, and even Fidenlina had no objections. Fully impressed, the Vice Master promised to support Oscar in every possible way. All he needed to do was ask. Oscar immediately requested to gather as many mages as possible at level 4 or higher. The Vice Master agreed, allowing Oscar to select them personally. He instructed Fidenlina to post a recruitment notice in the tower, stating that level 4 or higher mages were needed for the potion lab, with a daily wage and meat as a side dish. Within hours, the potion lab was filled with senior students. Oscar arrived and was amazed at the number of students who had come voluntarily. Trying to capture their attention, Oscar cast a soundbind spell to silence the chatter. He bowed and respectfully requested their help to produce the Cadena flu vaccine and cure. The senior students smirked at his display, suspicious that Oscar might be attempting another scam. Confused by their reaction, Oscar asked Frank if the students really hated him that much. Frank confirmed that their resentment was understandable. They remembered Oscar's arrogance, reckless spending, lack of research. This made Oscar question whether the previous Oscar had truly been such a terrible mage. One of the senior students, a yellow-haired girl, stepped forward to ask questions about recreating the lost potion formulas. Oscar revealed that the formulas would be revived, surprising everyone. She then asked if the cure had been proven effective. Oscar confirmed that a contract had already been signed with the order. The girl hesitated and asked why Oscar would share such a valuable secret with them, considering the risk of leaks to other towers. Oscar candidly admitted that he didn't understand why senior students continued to stay at the White Tower despite their talents. Angered by his attitude, she declared that she and the others had wasted their time and began to leave. Oscar called out to her, claiming he knew the sacrifices she had made for the White Tower. The girl froze and turned around. Her name was Rena, a 25-year-old mage whose talent and leadership had drawn attention from the Red Tower and various corporations, all of whom she had refused. Oscar also knew about Herrick Dryan, a 26-year-old level 5 mage whom the Imperial Palace had offered a position as a royal battle mage, but he declined. Similarly, Deckard Line, another 26-year-old level 5 mage, had rejected multiple offers to become an instructor at the Imperial Academy. Rena and her peers were the backbone of the White Tower, and Oscar now understood the level of dedication and talent he had at his disposal. Level 4 mage Sepia Rose, 23 years old, had also been sought out by the Yellow Tower for her creative alchemy skills, but she turned them down. Not only the students Oscar named, but all the senior mages in the White Tower had received similar offers, and none of them accepted. Oscar reflected on himself, admitting that if he had received such offers, he wasn't sure he could have turned them down. Rena and the other students realized that the elders already knew about all the offers but had chosen to pretend otherwise, so as not to burden them. Oscar reminded them that the White Tower was enduring its coldest winter in history. Even though they could have left for somewhere warmer, they chose to stay, and that's why he trusted them completely. Then, with a show of exaggerated sadness, Oscar pretended that if the seniors wouldn't help, he would have no choice but to make the potion only with Frank. To make it more convincing, he began brewing the potion himself while instructing Frank to follow along, acting as though no one else would come to assist. Wearing his glasses and looking forlorn, he captured the attention of the senior students. Rena coughed, adjusted her glasses, and started helping, which encouraged others to join in. Frank was amazed, realizing just how persuasive Oscar could be with his words. A week later, Oscar went to the 10th floor to read the newspaper while waiting for the vice master to bring back Walter. The news had spread exactly as planned by Oscar and Archbishop Baldwin. Frank came running, informing Oscar that pre-orders for the vaccine were flooding in from all over the country. The sales could make them a fortune, though the hype would fade once the outbreak ended. No worries, though. Oscar had healing potions ready, which were always in demand. Frank excitedly asked if they were the legendary tier of the Stars potion, but Oscar explained they would only sell low and mid-grade potions for now. Tier of the Stars was the tower's most famous potion, said to even have the power to revive the dead. Releasing it now would risk the Azure Tower trying to steal the formula, but for now, the Archbishop was acting as their shield. Oscar focused on strengthening the White Tower first. He instructed Frank to gather ingredients for the Tier of the Stars, naming 2 herbs, but Frank stopped him, noting that even these 2 were difficult to find now. Oscar was shocked. During his time, these herbs were a specialty of Serin, but they had disappeared over the ages. Determined to see for himself, he dragged Frank along. The carriage could not take them deeper into the region, so they walked 10 miles. Eventually, they spotted a cabin. Knocking on the door, they were greeted by an old man, who asked if they had walked all the way there. Frank confirmed, explaining that the carriage could only take them to the start of the trail. Just then, a few cars arrived, with people asking the old man to sell his land immediately. Businessman Dever Paywall arrives at the herb farm and immediately asks Ivan if he is ready to sell his land. He offers 10 times the normal price, but Ivan refuses without hesitation, stating he would not sell even for Misrilo Castle. In response, Dever warns that the factories he plans to build will eventually make the land worthless. Ivan stands his ground, declaring that as long as he is alive, no construction permits will ever be approved. Before leaving, Dever deliberately steps on the herbs, treating it as his so-called payment for the visit. From a distance, Oscar and Frank observe the exchange, confused about the situation. Back in his car, Dever's subordinate informs him that the two young men are White Tower mages who recently earned a large sum from a vaccine. This information unsettles Dever, as Ivan could rely on their support and hold out for years. With loan interest rapidly increasing, Dever decides to take drastic action. That very night, he plans to hire mercenaries to eliminate Ivan and report him as missing, allowing the land to be auctioned. Although his subordinate is concerned about provoking the four major magic towers, Dever dismisses the risk, claiming the White Tower is already in decline. Later that night, Frank tells Oscar that Ivan is a kind and generous man for offering them food and shelter. Curious about the earlier encounter, Oscar asks Ivan about Dever. Ivan explains that Dever is a dangerous figure who has been acquiring land through intimidation and other questionable means to build the largest industrial zone on the continent. He adds that he has managed to remain on his land only because the imperial family recognizes him as a valuable cultural figure in herb farming. Despite everything, Ivan refuses to sell, as the land has been his home his entire life. As they sit together under the night sky, Frank admits he envies Oscar's talent and the way his life seems to shine so brightly. Meanwhile, Oscar quietly questions why he was ever labeled a problem child. As they discuss plans to revive the Serenor business with Ivan the following day, Oscar suddenly senses four individuals moving stealthily outside, people even Frank cannot detect. He immediately wakes Frank and tells him to prepare. Outside, the Gunman Jack gang, a group of notorious northern mercenaries with bounties on their heads, approaches the house. One member, Max, slips inside, assuming it will be an easy task after spotting no visible mages. However, Oscar ambushes him from the shadows and strikes with Wind Bullet, a spell described in his own research that uses wind magic to replicate the force of a firearm. The attack is far more powerful than Oscar anticipated. The rest of the gang is shaken and demands to know what happened to Max. Oscar calmly responds that Max will not be returning. Their leader remains composed and attempts to negotiate, asking Oscar to reveal Ivan's location in exchange for leaving peacefully. Recognizing their experience and discipline, Oscar refuses to let them go. He warns them to hold on to their hostility if they are seeking a fight. Finally losing patience, the leader orders his men to attack, while Oscar simply smiles as they charge forward. Oscar engages one of the mercenaries, but the situation quickly escalates when the leader suddenly betrays his own subordinate, firing straight, and takes down his subordinate as well in an attempt to strike Oscar. Sensing the danger, Oscar retreats just in time. The leader coldly remarks that if Oscar had hesitated even slightly, he would have been finished. Shocked, Oscar questions whether the fallen man was his ally, but the leader dismisses him as easily replaceable. This ruthless attitude leaves Oscar reflecting on how dangerous such criminals truly are. Drawing on knowledge from his past life, Oscar analyzes the leader's weapon and identifies 3 spells imbued within it: acceleration, enhancement, and penetration. Impressed by Oscar's insight, the leader offers him a position, but Oscar refuses, fully aware that such an alliance would end in betrayal. The leader resumes firing, forcing Oscar to take cover. With his wind bullets proving too slow and his mana reserves running low, Oscar calculates a narrow 1.4-second window during the leader's reload. Seizing the opportunity, Oscar uses acceleration to dash forward. The leader responds by firing his final shot, Trinity, believing it to be impossible to evade. However, Oscar combines friction reduction with internal durability enhancement on his wind shield, causing the bullet to deflect harmlessly. Wasting no time, Oscar charges forward and lands a precise strike, swiftly taking down the leader. He then examines the weapon his opponent had been using, noting it was imbued with Trinity, acceleration, and enhancement spells, and required precise aiming. Facing this powerful weapon had been challenging, but by casting friction reduction and durability enhancement on his wind shield, Oscar had predicted the bullet would be unable to penetrate. As expected, the projectile slid harmlessly along the shield. Had his plan failed, Oscar would have been in serious trouble. Taking note of the encounter, Oscar resolves to study modern weapons more closely in the future. The first presence he sent consisted of 4 attackers in total, and he has already defeated 3 of them. Concerned for Frank's safety, he immediately moves to regroup. At the same time, Frank and Ivan are fleeing. Frank deceives Ivan, urging him to go ahead while he stays behind to confront the final mercenary alone. The fourth mercenary soon appears, mocking Frank's attempt to protect Ivan and expressing curiosity about the magic towers. Frank launches an attack, but the mercenary easily blocks it and strikes back, landing what should have been a fatal blow. Confident in his victory, the mercenary begins to laugh, only to realize that Frank remains unharmed. This unexpected resilience gives Frank the opening he needs to counterattack and defeat the mercenary. In that moment, it is revealed that Frank possesses a unique constitution that allows him to withstand otherwise lethal damage. Oscar watches from the shadows as Frank battles the remaining mercenaries, clearly impressed by his performance. Drawing on the knowledge from his past life as the legendary Magic Tower Master, Oscar realizes that Frank possesses an extremely rare ability known as the God of Wind. This power allows him to transform parts of his body into wind, rendering ordinary physical attacks ineffective. Oscar notes that such an ability can only be countered with advanced magic or sword chi, something he had previously only encountered in ancient records about the seventh Magic Tower Master. He had no idea Frank possessed such a gift. Stepping forward, Oscar praises Frank for his efforts. However, Frank suddenly remembers Ivan and panics, calling out for him. As they regroup, Oscar quietly considers that, with proper training, Frank could become as powerful as dozens of high-ranking mages combined. Once reunited, Ivan expresses his deep gratitude, admitting he would not have survived the night without their help. Oscar acknowledges that he failed to stop one of the swordsmen and admits the situation could have ended badly without Frank's support. Ivan then warns them that Dever is unlikely to give up after a single failed attempt. When Frank asks why Dever is so determined to acquire the land, Ivan explains that it is the most fertile land in all of Surin. However, he also reveals that over the past 20 years, its fertility has been declining due to Western factories dumping waste into the Balf River. If more factories are built nearby, resisting will eventually become meaningless. Oscar then asks about the herbalist's loyalty to the White Tower, specifically whether it traces back to a promise made between Ivan's ancestors and the fourth Magic Tower Master, Reynold Ayus. Ivan is surprised by Oscar's knowledge. Oscar explains to Frank that, long ago, herbalists were treated as outcasts and persecuted, until Reynold Ayus granted them Surin as a permanent home. Although Oscar claims he learned this from a simple storybook, he actually knows it from his past life, as the true history exists only in a restricted text given to Tower Masters. Moved by this, Ivan becomes emotional and says the White Tower gave his ancestors both a home and their dignity, and that they could never abandon that bond. In response, Oscar steps forward, bows respectfully, and promises that the White Tower will stand with him from now on. He reassures Ivan not to worry about Dever, explaining that the Imperial family will act quickly, especially since he is scheduled to sign the Cadena flu treatment contract directly with the Emperor that very day. The scene then shifts to Dever's office, where he is angrily shouting at his subordinate when the door is suddenly forced open. Senior Superintendent Walker of the Imperial Ministry of Home Affairs enters and arrests Dever on the spot, charging him with attempted murder, blackmail, illegal property acquisition, and damage to a protected cultural asset. Dever protests, claiming he has a powerful backer, but Walker coldly responds that his backer is the Emperor himself. Dever is then restrained and taken away. Outside, Walker's subordinate, Dolan, questions why their unit acted so swiftly for a single criminal. Walker explains that it was a direct order, as the Emperor places great importance on the White Tower. He reminds Dolan that humanity survived the Demon War 20 years ago largely due to the sacrifices of the White Tower. He then orders his men to head west and put a stop to the factories polluting the Balf River, quietly considering it his way of repaying Oscar and Frank for handling the mercenaries. Back at the White Tower, Elder Maxim welcomes Oscar and Frank and suggests they celebrate. Suddenly, Frank appears uneasy, makes a quick excuse, and rushes down the hallway. Maxim watches him leave with a troubled expression. Noticing this, Oscar asks what is wrong. Maxim sighs and reveals that he has just received an official message from the influential Sirius family, stating that they are taking Frank back. This means Frank will be leaving the White Tower permanently. Maxim adds that the family claims all arrangements have already been made with Frank and asks Oscar if he knew anything about it. Oscar remains silent in the hallway, his expression dark as he begins to consider his next move. Oscar enters Frank's room, only for Frank to briefly mistake him for someone named Grank. Realizing what happened, Frank admits he overheard everything and apologizes for not telling Oscar about his departure sooner, explaining that it was difficult for him to say it clearly. He reveals that he must return to his family's trading company and enter a strategic marriage to support his family's future. Frank confesses that he feels he has reached his limit, believing he could at least rise within the weakest magic tower, only to be faced with a harsher reality. Oscar responds firmly, assuring him that he is truly talented. At that moment, a voice calls from outside, giving Frank 5 minutes to come down. Oscar steps out and asks the man how much it would cost for Frank to stay. The man introduces himself as Grank Sirius, Frank's older brother and the vice leader of the Sirius Trading Company. Oscar introduces himself and confidently proposes a deal. He promises to turn Frank into a top mage of the White Tower within 2 years. If he fails, he vows to hand over the next 50 years of profits from the Cadena flu vaccine to the Sirius Trading Company, with the Vice Tower Master serving as a witness. When Grank questions whether this is simply out of friendship, Oscar clarifies that Frank is both worthy and essential to his plan to restore the White Tower to its former glory within 5 years. Grank accepts the proposal but imposes a strict condition, emphasizing that trust is everything to merchants. He challenges Oscar to prove his capability by facing his level 5 night guard at noon the following day, adding that the knight will not use sword chi. Oscar accepts without hesitation. After Grank leaves, Frank panics, pointing out that a level 2 mage cannot defeat a level 5 knight. Oscar calmly agrees, but notes that a level 4 mage could. When Frank asks if Oscar intends to reach that level in a single day, Oscar reveals his true plan, to push Frank past his limits and help him break through to level 4 within a single day, so that Frank himself can face the knight. Later, they arrive at the training room on the 40th floor. Oscar instructs Frank to stand in a natural posture and begins circulating his mana. Using the insight from his past life as an archmage, Oscar quickly identifies the points where Frank loses mana due to inefficiencies in his internal flow. He guides Frank to adjust his control, regulating the speed of his mana and dividing its flow to reduce loss. Oscar then tells Frank to use the wind magic he demonstrated at the herb field. Frank hesitates, visibly shaken, and admits he is afraid. He recalls a past incident where he recklessly attempted to transform his entire body into wind, causing his mana to spiral out of control. He felt as though his very essence was breaking apart and would not have survived if the Tower Master had not intervened. Since then, the ability only activates instinctively in life-threatening situations. Oscar reassures him that such mana control issues are not uncommon and can be overcome through intense training. Without wasting time, Oscar begins drawing a summoning circle on the ground. Alarmed, Frank asks if he is about to summon a demon. Oscar casually clarifies that he intends to summon a wind spirit and directly integrate it into Frank's body. In the training room, Frank attempts to chant and summon a wind spirit, but nothing happens. Frustrated, he questions how he is supposed to control his mana with such poor spirit affinity. Seeing this, Oscar steps in and shares knowledge from his past life, recalling a spirit summoning ceremony he once learned during a visit to the Elven Kingdom. He remembers trying it out of curiosity and becoming the first human summoner in over a century. As Oscar begins chanting, he reflects on the world tree he once saw, and soon successfully summons a powerful spirit. The spirit, Celestine, immediately recognizes Oscar from 27 years ago and eagerly asks to form a contract with him. However, Oscar declines and clearly states that Frank is the one who needs the contract. Celestine agrees, and the spirit forms a bond with Frank instead. The next day, everyone gathers in the dueling hall. The Vice Tower Master is present as the official witness, agreeing mainly because Oscar insisted on it. Grank Sirius introduces his fighter, Lasley Morgan, a level 5 knight. Oscar, in turn, introduces himself as a level 2 mage. The rules are straightforward. The first person to take their opponent's necklace wins, and if no one wins within 5 minutes, Grank loses. Grank notices Oscar is still wearing his usual robe and asks if he plans to fight in it. Oscar calmly reveals that he will not be fighting. Frank will take his place. This angers Grank, who demands an explanation. Oscar points out that the terms never required him to fight personally, and adds that a level 4 mage stands a far better chance anyway. Frank is left stunned, unable to understand how Frank could have advanced from level 3 to level 4 in less than a day. Assuming it is a bluff, he instructs Laszlo not to hold back. Before the match begins, Oscar reassures Frank, telling him not to be afraid. As the duel starts, Frank quickly retreats, creating a 20-meter gap between himself and Laszlo, and launches 2 wind blades simultaneously. Laszlo blocks both attacks with ease, stopping their momentum without even using sword chi. He then releases the overwhelming pressure of a level 5 knight, making the difference in strength clear. Watching from the sidelines, Grant concludes that Frank was never suited to be a battle mage and should return to the trading company before getting seriously injured. Laszlo, confident the fight is already decided, charges forward and delivers a powerful strike, declaring the match over. However, he is caught off guard when he sees Frank smiling. A brief flashback reveals the events of the previous night. Oscar confirmed that the low-level spirit integration was successful, but warned Frank that he still could not fully transform his body into wind due to lingering fear. To overcome this limitation, Oscar taught him the most powerful aspect of the God of Wind ability, a technique called unitization, which allows Frank to convert anything in contact with his body, including clothing or weapons, into wind. Back in the present, Frank executes unitization flawlessly, evading Laszlo's decisive blow. The unexpected move leaves Frank watching in complete disbelief. Frank seizes the moment, grabs the necklace, and wins the duel. Frank is left in shock, but formally accepts his defeat. Before leaving, he asks Oscar to take care of his younger brother from now on, then departs the tower. The next day, Oscar brings Frank down to a dark basement prison. Confused, Frank immediately complains that this does not resemble any training room he has ever seen. Oscar casually explains that it is indeed the basement prison, and that it will serve as Frank's isolated training space for the next 30 days. Frank protests, pointing out that he has done nothing wrong and has barely had any time to rest. Oscar ignores the complaints, stating that Frank needs this period to adapt to his new spirit and stabilize his level for magic. He pushes Frank inside, locks the heavy door, and privately admits that he personally arranged this isolation. Later that night, Oscar meets with the Vice Tower Master, who is highly pleased with Frank's victory. He shares positive news that the Sirius Trading Company has agreed to let the White Tower use its entire distribution network at no cost. He then asks Oscar to take on a special lecture for the tower's mages. Drawing on his past life experience and sharp intuition, Oscar quickly realizes that the White Tower needs to grow stronger in a short amount of time. The Vice Tower Master confirms this, revealing that the Emperor is secretly planning to revive Mage Night, a major gathering where mages from all towers come together. He expresses concern that the ambitious Black Tower may use this opportunity to challenge the White Tower. Oscar confidently accepts the responsibility. As he walks through the campus afterward, Oscar reflects on the spirit summoning ceremony. When he summoned Celestine, the spirit was initially angered at being called only to form a contract with someone else. However, Oscar managed to calm the situation using knowledge from his past life, instructing Celestine to deliver a message to the Spirit Queen that the White Mage had returned. Shocked that a human could invoke the Spirit Queen so directly, Celestine immediately agreed to the arrangement. In return, Celestine conveyed a message from the Spirit Queen, reminding Oscar not to forget his past promise. Oscar quietly resolves to fulfill the promise he once failed to keep. Back in the present, 32 low-level mages gather in the main building for Oscar's lecture, titled Reinterpretation of Basic Magic. One noble student, Damien Proud, openly criticizes the session, complaining that the tower is wasting time and resources on such a basic topic. Suddenly, the entire room falls silent. Oscar steps onto the podium, having already cast a sound-binding spell that suppresses all noise within the room. He introduces himself as Oscar Crushen, a level 2 mage, which shocks the students, who cannot believe someone of such a low rank is leading the class. Remaining calm, Oscar tells them they are free to leave, but with one condition. They have 10 minutes to break his silent spell and clearly state that they do not wish to attend his lecture. If they fail, they will stay and learn. The students quickly realize this is a test, as a level 2 mage should not be capable of casting such a precise silent spell alone. Within the time limit, only one student succeeds, a determined beginner named Damien Proud. When time runs out, Oscar announces that Damien is the only one who passed. Confidently, Damien declares that he has no need for the class, and Oscar simply agrees. However, as Damien turns to leave, he hesitates. Feeling unsettled by how easily he was dismissed, he decides to stay and see what Oscar has to offer. As a reward, Oscar invites Damien to the front and asks him to demonstrate his preferred basic spell. Damien casually casts Wind Cutter. After observing it, Oscar immediately points out that the spell is incomplete and highlights two major flaws. First, he explains that the spell is not truly wind. While Damien argues that wind is just moving air, Oscar clarifies that, unlike water or fire, which retain their properties regardless of form, wind only exists through continuous motion. If the flow of mana stops, the spell will collapse. The second issue is inefficiency. Oscar notes that Damien is using far more mana than necessary. From a single cast, he deduces Damien's background, coming from the well-known Proud family, and attempting to replicate advanced magic before mastering the basics, forcing his spells to work through excessive mana output. Shocked by how accurately Oscar assessed him, Damien quietly decides to remain for the rest of the lecture. Over the next 3 weeks, Oscar's reputation spreads throughout the White Tower. Even level 4 and 5 senior mages begin attending his lectures, and students line up at dawn just to secure a seat. During one particularly crowded session, Oscar notices Elder Maxim seated quietly at the back. He begins the lesson by stating that wind is the most fundamental basic spell. Some students complain that the topic is too simple, but Oscar ignores them and asks Maxim to demonstrate. Maxim releases a powerful, heated gust of wind. Oscar then asks a young student, Amy Raven, to perform the same spell. She produces a gentle, warm breeze. Oscar asks the class to identify the difference. A student named Veronica Fricks answers that it comes down to the temperament of the mana. Oscar confirms this and explains that the White Tower represents true balance. While the red and gold towers emphasize raw power and speed, wind and water magic are unique in their adaptability. They can shift between hot and cold as needed. Wind, in particular, is even more versatile than water, as it has no fixed form and can blend with anything. He concludes that a mage's true strength lies in how they perceive and understand their own wind. At that moment, Maxim begins murmuring to himself before suddenly falling into a deep trance, visibly affected by Oscar's words. As another mage moves to check on him, Oscar immediately raises his voice, warning everyone not to touch the elder. The room falls silent, with all eyes fixed on Maxim as they wait for what happens next. The students watch in awe as Elder Maxim undergoes a deep magical awakening rite in the classroom. Oscar immediately instructs everyone not to touch him, ensuring the moment is not disturbed. After some time, Maxim exhales slowly and tells Oscar that, although he did not reach level 8, he is still deeply grateful for the lesson. Oscar smiles, quietly realizing that this breakthrough will make his future teachings far more effective. He also notes that one of the biggest gains today was capturing the attention of Veronica Fricks, a student he had previously labeled as a problem case in his personal journal. The following day, Oscar visits the future innovation training room. A brief flashback reveals that Veronica had once mocked him for not even knowing the facility existed, which sparked his curiosity. Approaching the specialized entrance, Oscar steps inside and is greeted by ARGO, a next-generation training support system developed by the Golden Tower and clearly operating as a highly profitable service. Skipping the registration process, Oscar enters as an unknown user. He selects Level 1, where ARGO instructs him to destroy 3 floating targets using either physical or magical attacks, with a warning to avoid wide-area spells. Oscar clears the stage instantly and requests to jump directly to Level 100. ARGO issues a serious warning. Beyond level 80, the targets become smaller, significantly faster, and begin actively pursuing the user. Additionally, taking 10 hits will end the session. Ignoring the warning, Oscar proceeds. Facing 1,000 hostile targets, he carefully manages his mana. Drawing on his past life combat experience, he refines his Wind Cutter into smaller, sharper blades, maximizing precision while minimizing waste. He successfully clears the entire stage, but collapses to the floor, exhausted. In that moment, he realizes that the standards expected of modern mages are far higher than they were in his era. Shortly afterward, Veronica enters the room to train. Oscar greets her by casually quoting a phrase from his past life as Oscar's sage, stating that a healthy body leads to healthy mana. Veronica is visibly confused, wondering why he is suddenly quoting a legendary figure and behaving so differently. She instructs Argo to begin her session at level 50 as a warm-up and checks the current rankings. The leaderboard shows first place held by an unknown user who cleared level 100 in 9 minutes and 57 seconds. Second place belongs to Killian Rockwood at 14 minutes and 2 seconds, while Veronica herself ranks third at 14 minutes and 55 seconds. When she asks Argo to reveal the identity of the top player, the system refuses due to privacy restrictions. Veronica begins to suspect that Oscar is the one behind the record. Later, Oscar meets with Elder Maxim, who informs him that market merchants are refusing to purchase the White Tower's potions out of fear of the Azure Tower. In response, Oscar decides to bypass the merchants entirely. Instead, he approaches the White Tower's delivery group, known as the Wind Riders, who regularly interact with citizens to gather signatures. Oscar devises a new strategy: direct, door-to-door distribution. He plans to rebrand the recovery potions into everyday health tonics tailored for different age groups and needs. A few days later, one of the Wind Riders visits an elderly man named Graham. As Graham mentions feeling fatigued and lacking energy, the rider offers him the White Tower's latest product, a specialized health tonic called 50. He explains that the formula is designed specifically for seniors, helping to strengthen immunity and improve overall energy. To build trust, the rider mentions that another local, Old Man Millera, has already returned to hiking thanks to the tonic, and adds that it was developed by the talented mage Oscar Crushen. Graham is hesitant at first, recalling past disappointments with unreliable products such as the Blue Tower's Nutrition Bomb and Nutec's Strong Tonic. In response, the rider presents a special offer available only to Serin residents, a 50% discount, reducing the price to 799 bells for a 1-year subscription, along with an interest-free monthly payment plan and the first bottle provided at no cost. Curious, Graham drinks the free bottle and immediately feels a noticeable lightness in his body. Back at the White Tower, a concerned mage rushes in with news that the Azure Tower has launched a 50% discount on its potions, clearly attempting to dominate the market. Oscar remains calm, pointing out that such aggressive pricing can only be sustained for a limited time. When another mage suggests bundling recovery potions with the Cadena flu cure to compete, Oscar firmly rejects the idea, knowing it could be misinterpreted as exploiting a medical need. Instead, Oscar unveils a new strategy. He plans to convert their stock of mid-level potions into a rebranded Zero Tonic series, introduce family bundle discounts to improve accessibility. 3 weeks later, at the Azure Tower, a mage named Moira Main proudly reports to his department head that they have successfully overwhelmed the White Tower. However, the department head angrily throws a newsletter at him, revealing that the White Tower has sold 10 million bottles of the Zero series in just 1 month. Moira is stunned, as these figures never appeared in traditional market data. The department head explains that the White Tower bypassed the market entirely by using a direct subscription-based, door-to-door distribution model. He further reveals that Oscar released a public statement claiming the discounted pricing would remain permanent, framing it as a response to the Azure Tower's campaign, while actually concealing the product's true base value. With their strategy undermined, the department head, now furious, assigns Moira to long-term accountability for the losses. Meanwhile, far to the east in the Yin dynasty, villagers from the Nine Dragon sect struggle against a powerful monster. A hooded figure suddenly appears and swiftly defeats it using innate magic. A man named Zhang Chun greets the figure, who is revealed to be Shasha Maist, the master of the White Tower. Zhang Chun hands her a recent newsletter from the Empire. Expecting the worst after being away for 2 months, Shasha hesitates to read it, fearing her tower may have collapsed financially. Instead, she discovers the overwhelming success of the delivery and tonic businesses. Shocked, she questions whether the results are even real, admitting that she never expected the delivery system to succeed, as she originally had a completely different purpose for creating it. Confused by the rapid changes, Shasha instructs Zhang Chun to send her commission fee to the Imperial Bank. Without delay, she departs, determined to return and see the transformation of the White Tower with her own eyes. Lena tries to compliment Oscar, but her words confuse him. She then explains that she never imagined they would be involved in such a magical situation. Thanks to Oscar's interview, the White Tower has received a strong response from selling recovery potions. Not only Surin, but other cities are also requesting the distribution of these medicines. Since things are going well, Lena attempts to contact the military side as well, but they continue their deal with the Blue Tower. Oscar wonders why Lena keeps reporting everything to him and tells her that she does not need to report anymore. Lena explains that she reports to him because she believes he is essentially the head of potion production. After hearing his instructions, she asks about performance reports, so Oscar tells her to report once a month instead. This makes Lena jokingly ask if he is trying to hand over all the work to her while he relaxes. Oscar becomes confused, as he is actually quite busy himself. They have already stocked up the warehouse, and now it is time to strengthen their foundation. For example, they need to restore lost magical reference books. Oscar could easily recreate them, but doing so might raise suspicion. Instead, he plans to publish the work under a mage who has status, fame, and experience in theoretical magic. The scene then shifts to another professor who finally comes out of his room after a long time. Elder Maxim and Fidenlina notice him. He is also an elder of the White Mage Tower and a theoretical mage named Schweinkoch. He speaks about his research, which has not been going well, even after 3 months of work. Schwein is growing anxious about achieving the results needed to complete his research. It has already been 7 years, and he has still not succeeded. Elder Maxim suggests that he take Oscar as an assistant, but Schwein immediately refuses. He insists that someone at level 1 could not possibly understand such advanced concepts. Fidenlina corrects him, saying that Oscar is now level 2, but Schwein mocks Oscar. This prompts her to defend him, saying that he has worked very hard. Schwein is surprised, as she used to dislike Oscar for wasting large amounts of money without results. Elder Maxim then informs Schwein about Oscar's recent achievements. When he mentions the improvements in the White Tower, Schwein observes that everyone seems to be doing much better and jokingly asks if the tower has won the lottery. Maxim explains that it is all due to Oscar finally showing his true potential. In short, they tell Schwein how Oscar has somehow mastered alchemy. Both Fidenlina and Maxim praise his clear explanations and his talent for business. Seeing how highly they speak of Oscar, Schwein stops them and tells them to calm down. He agrees to meet Oscar but warns them not to expect much. He believes it is impossible for a level 2 mage to excel in advanced theory. In his view, no matter how talented someone is, there are limits to what a level 2 mage can understand. This is especially true because the current research is based on the work of a legendary genius, the great mage Oscar. Schwein's goal is to restore that unique magic. Finally, Schwein calls for Oscar, introduces himself, and explains the project that has been stalled for years. Hearing this, Oscar realizes that he has found exactly the person he was looking for. However, before accepting him as an assistant, Schwein decides to test his ability. He gives Oscar 50 minutes to solve a set of problems. Oscar goes along with the situation happily, knowing that even if he reveals hidden knowledge, no one will question him. As he begins solving the problems, he realizes that the questions are meant for 5th or 6th level mages to identify basic errors. Just by looking at them, Oscar concludes that Schwein's research is already partly complete and that he is either performing final validation or calculating mana values. Schwein notices that Oscar has already reached the last page. This makes him think that Oscar's pride might be hurt, and that he is simply writing random answers without understanding the problems. Schwein assumes that anyone of a lower level would be overwhelmed by questions of such high difficulty. However, as Oscar works through the problems, he realizes that Schwein is trying to restore an old spell that Oscar himself created in the past. This makes him feel pleased. After finishing, Oscar hands over the answer sheet. Schwein still underestimates him at first, but he is soon shocked to discover that every answer is correct. He cannot help but praise Oscar's calculation ability. When Schwein reaches the final question, he asks if Oscar truly believed his answer was correct. Oscar confidently confirms it. Schwein then asks which of the 4 mana values he selected. Oscar replies that he used all of them by applying dynamic mana values. He then explains his reasoning in a clear and logical way, which greatly interests Schwein. Impressed, Schwein asks for permission to test the spell immediately using those values. Schwein performs the test, and it works. He is so pleased that he decides to include Oscar as a co-author on the published paper, even though Oscar did not intend for that to happen. When asked about the final problem, Schwein explains that it was based on a spell created by the former Tower Master, Oscar Sage. The spell is called Ouroboros. Oscar feels puzzled and wonders why Schwein would spend 7 years trying to restore such a spell. The spell generates wind almost endlessly by injecting mana, appearing to defy the law of mana conservation. In theory, it could act as a perfect and endless energy source. That is why it was named Ouroboros, a symbol of an eternal cycle. Although the spell sounds powerful, Oscar knows that it was actually a failed creation. Humanity has already conquered land and water, but the sky remains out of reach. To change that, the Skirich project was launched. As part of the effort to gain an advantage in the war against demons, they began developing airships. The Ouroboros spell was meant to serve as their power source. However, despite having nearly perfect magical theory, the project was abandoned because the energy output was too weak to lift an airship. Oscar begins to wonder if they are trying to restart the project, but Schwein interrupts his thoughts. He excitedly mentions that he cannot wait to share the news with Sasha. He explains that she will be delighted to hear that the founder of the delivery project has finally succeeded. At that moment, Oscar understands why they wanted to restore the spell. Before he can say more, Schwein interrupts again and declares that Oscar has fulfilled the long-held wishes of both Oscar Sage and Lady Sasha. He says this marks the first step toward opening a path to the skies. Schwein then reveals that they plan to revive the Skirich project, using Ouroboros as its engine. Oscar disagrees and says it will not succeed, as the energy output is still not enough to lift an aircraft based on past records. In response, Schwein explains that things are different now compared to 23 years ago. Today, they have advanced magical engineering, which could change everything. Thanks to this unique magic, the Yellow Magic Tower, which also worked on the project, found an important clue that led to the development of magical engineering. Using that discovery, they made remarkable progress after the war. This makes Oscar feel a bit sad, as he believes he should have been the one to discover it. If he had, the White Tower might not have fallen into its current state. Putting those thoughts aside, Schwein explains his theory for the airship. He plans to amplify the output of Ouroboros through magical engineering and use that power to launch an airship. To achieve this, he intends to use a battery as the medium for amplification. The idea is to create a continuous loop where the battery is charged using the wind generated by Ouroboros, allowing it to supply a steady source of energy. Hearing this brilliant idea, Oscar wonders if the Yellow Tower knows about it, but Schwein confirms that they do not. In fact, they do not even believe the idea will work. Instead, they are focusing on developing a different form of transportation known as trains. Oscar does not fully understand this method, but he knows that the master of the Yellow Tower is not someone who holds on to failed ideas. Trains will be a useful innovation, but Oscar believes they will not be as groundbreaking as airships. In simple terms, Schwein has continued this project despite losses because he wants to take control of the delivery market by using the sky route. At present, transportation depends on carts and ships, which are limited. An airship would change everything and make trains seem less impressive in comparison. To mark the beginning of this new era, the Tower Master Sasha and Schwein set a goal to restore the Ouroboros spell and reveal it at the White Night Festival. Thanks to Oscar, they are finally able to achieve this long-awaited dream. Oscar realizes that even though he once gave up on his dream, his student has continued to pursue it. This inspires him to guide them as a teacher and help open the path forward. Because of this, Oscar suggests that they should also reveal a prototype airship at the festival. Schwein immediately agrees, as seeing a real model would have a far greater impact than just explaining the idea. Schwein then goes to his table, gathers some documents, and hands them to Oscar, asking him to review them. As Oscar reads through them, he is surprised to see new formulas that he has never encountered before. These documents are related to creating magical engineering batteries. He studies them carefully and notices that many of the formulas are based on the Ouroboros spell. After finishing his review, Schwein asks for Oscar's opinion. Oscar confirms that the work is very well done and suggests that they begin research immediately. Schwein agrees, but before moving forward, he apologizes for involving Oscar in something dangerous. He explains that once the prototype is revealed, many people may target Oscar. Oscar calmly accepts this and says it is not a problem. Schwein feels that Oscar is taking the situation too lightly, but Oscar explains his view. He says that people may try legal action or even attempt to harm them, but he is not afraid. If he lets fear control him, he will only keep making excuses and achieve nothing. That is what he truly fears. If he runs away now, he will never escape his current life and will be left empty inside. Oscar also points out that the White Tower has lost much of its strength over the past 20 years. He believes this research will help them stand strong again. Thinking about that gives him the courage to face any outside threats. Hearing this, Schwein feels reassured and begins to see Oscar in a new light. He shakes Oscar's hand and says that he will rely on him from now on. Their research begins, and on the first day, they focus on improving the stability of the spell since their goal is to build an airship. By the fourth day, Schwein finds it difficult to adjust an already well-designed spell. Even a small mistake causes errors. They continue testing and refining the spell, but Oscar reminds Schwein to eat, as he has already skipped 2 meals. Schwein asks for coffee, but just then the electricity goes out, so they decide to take a short break. By the 6th day, Schwein praises Oscar, saying that the success of the research is largely due to him. Oscar humbly replies that Schwein could have achieved the same result on his own. Schwein admits that he did not expect to progress enough to reveal an airship, and he is surprised that the magic was completed so quickly. As they share this moment, the electricity goes out again, and they laugh about the repeated outages. Soon after, Oscar is called by the Vice Tower Master, which disappoints him, but Schwein encourages him to go. He says it is now his turn to accomplish something important and promises to complete the battery that will work with Ouroboros. He tells Oscar not to worry. When Oscar arrives at the Vice Master's office, they discuss the ongoing blackout issues, which have been happening every 2 days. The Vice Master explains that the power plant needs to be cleared of slimes and asks for Oscar's help. Oscar agrees without hesitation. The Vice Master then instructs him to meet Veronica the next morning at 9. Oscar questions whether her involvement is necessary, but the Vice Master explains that beginners are required to work in pairs. He also hints that Veronica seems troubled and hopes Oscar can listen to her and offer some guidance. The next day, Oscar arrives on time, but Veronica complains that he is late. They leave immediately, with Veronica taking the lead and giving instructions like a senior. She makes it clear that Oscar should not act like a teacher outside the classroom. Oscar accepts this and stays quiet, and Veronica does the same. After some time, Oscar breaks the silence and asks why she seems tired and if something is bothering her. This makes Veronica upset, as she feels he is interfering again. However, Oscar remains calm and explains that he simply wants to help if he can. This only makes her more uneasy. Veronica is a mage whom the younger Oscar had written about many times, praising her outstanding talent. Oscar has always been curious about what made her so special. Because of this, he does not want to miss the opportunity to understand her better. Oscar offers a snack, using it as a light way to ease the mood. Veronica takes the bait and finally shares what has been troubling her. She admits that Oscar is the reason she has not been sleeping well. She has been trying to control a wind as powerful as Elder Maxim's, but no matter how much she trains, she cannot imitate it. The frustration keeps her awake, and she continues to push herself without rest. She makes it clear that this is not about learning from him, but rather what she sees as fair compensation for her lost sleep. Oscar's guess turns out to be correct. Her struggle comes from the previous lesson about the nature of mana. Veronica confirms that no matter how much she practices, her mana does not take on that nature. Oscar calmly explains that the reason is simple. That kind of wind does not suit her. Hearing this, Veronica becomes defensive and says he cannot understand her. She explains that she has always wanted that kind of intense wind and has trained for it for a long time. Oscar tells her to look at things from a different point of view, since others can sometimes see more clearly than we see ourselves. To give an example, he asks what kind of wind she thinks he uses. She replies that his wind feels arrogant and annoying. Oscar laughs and corrects her, saying his wind is actually known for being warm and comforting. Veronica mocks him, saying she has never heard of him being famous. In truth, she is simply unaware of his past. Setting aside the jokes, Oscar explains that the nature of mana is not about forcing what one wants. It is about discovering what suits a person best. This makes Veronica curious about what kind of mana would suit her. They soon arrive at the mana plant and notice a large number of slimes gathered there. Veronica immediately starts clearing them out. Watching her, Oscar realizes why his younger self praised her so highly. She is a speed-focused mage who can cast spells very quickly. Seeing her skill, Oscar thinks she could be trained into a powerful spellcaster like Majuro. who was once known as the brain of the White Tower. While Oscar is lost in thought, Veronica becomes annoyed and asks if he plans to let her handle everything alone. Oscar steps in to help, and Veronica mentions that all the slimes are crowded near the entrance. This detail makes Oscar suspicious. The slimes seem to be moving away from the interior, as if they are trying to escape something. Veronica insists that slimes are not intelligent, but Oscar explains that their strongest instinct is survival. This makes Veronica wonder if something dangerous is inside. To find out, Oscar suggests clearing the remaining slimes quickly and checking the interior. When they enter the power chamber, they discover a creature known as a sky silkworm. Oscar explains that it likely came here because it feeds on mana, and the chamber is full of it. Since the creature is still inside a cocoon, Veronica assumes it has not been born yet. However, Oscar corrects her and explains that it is currently in a metamorphosis stage. Veronica believes that defeating it will solve the blackout problem, but Oscar says there is both good news and bad news. The good news is that a sky silkworm in this stage is not very dangerous, and with Elder Maxim's help, it could be dealt with quickly. Veronica feels relieved, but Oscar then shares the bad news. Once it completes its transformation, it will become extremely hungry and attack anything nearby. Veronica suggests calling Maxim right away, but Oscar points out that there is no time. The slimes fleeing in panic means the transformation is almost complete. As the creature begins to emerge, Oscar removes his coat and tells Veronica to prepare for battle. The monster is massive. Veronica assumes it cannot fly since it is a silkworm, but Oscar quickly proves that wrong. This is no ordinary creature. It can fly. Veronica suggests retreating, but Oscar refuses. If they run, the monster will head toward the nearest city and put many lives at risk. The only option is to stop it here. Although frightened, Veronica gathers her courage and tells Oscar to stay back, which impresses him. Oscar then uses wind magic to send a message to the coachman, hoping he is still nearby and can call for help. Veronica launches an attack using wind press and follows it with gust hand and jet booster. Oscar suddenly pulls her back and uses wind magic to shield her from a cloud of invisible dust that can injure Veronica severely. Oscar realizes that this creature is more intelligent and dangerous than it appears. Veronica is shocked and asks how he even noticed the invisible dust. Oscar explains that he concentrated mana into his eyes to detect particles in the air. She is amazed by this, but before he can explain further, the monster attacks again. Oscar quickly puts up a wind shield to protect them. However, the situation becomes critical. Blocking just one attack drains most of Oscar's mana, leaving him unable to defend again. The only relief is that the creature needs about 5 minutes before it can launch another attack. They must defeat it within that time. As Oscar turns to speak with Veronica, he is shocked to see that she has been hit. Her leg is no longer responding. He realizes that fragments of the earlier attack must have passed through a gap in his shield. Veronica tells him to go get help while she holds the monster off, but Oscar knows she does not have enough strength left. He reassures her and tells her not to be afraid. He will not leave her behind. She reacts with frustration, but Oscar calmly reminds her that a mage of the White Tower never abandons a comrade. Oscar then casts an acceleration spell on himself, preparing to end the battle in a single move. He charges toward the monster, leaving Veronica worried and confused about his plan. With the help of her spell, Oscar launches himself into the air and takes aim at the creature. Oscar pulls the trigger, but he misses the monster's head because the impact causes his joints to give out. What shocks him even more is that the monster has already charged another beam attack. It fires again, but Oscar manages to dodge. In that moment, he realizes the monster has been planning to escape from the start, using the beam to clear a path. Oscar knows he cannot let it get away, but he no longer has enough mana to chase it. He quickly notices threads from the silkworm still attached to the creature. Without hesitation, he jumps and grabs onto them. The monster suddenly rises at high speed, dragging Oscar along. It tries to shake him off, but fails. Instead, it turns to attack him, which gives Oscar an opening. Using his free hand, he fires again. This time, his strike hits the monster and finally defeats it. With the fight over, Oscar calls out to Veronica for help, as he has completely run out of mana. She quickly responds by casting air cushion and gust hand to ensure he lands safely. Oscar loses consciousness for a few seconds, which makes Veronica panic, fearing the worst. When he opens his eyes, she reacts by punching him out of frustration and relief. At that moment, Maxim arrives and asks if they are both alright. Oscar informs him that both of his arms are dislocated, which shocks Veronica even more. He then jokingly complains to Maxim about Veronica hitting him. The next day, Veronica visits Oscar and brings a new article that praises him as a hero for defeating the Sky Silkworm. Oscar comments that he does not enjoy being famous and prefers focusing on protecting his own people. As they continue talking, Frank arrives and asks if Oscar is alright. He had just finished his closed-door training and came immediately after hearing the news. Oscar observes Frank and concludes that he has now reached level 4. Frank asks what happened and questions why Veronica is there. This irritates her, and she tells him not to act too familiar. Frank does not back down, and the tension rises between them. Veronica eventually stops the argument and then asks Oscar if he is AAA. Oscar does not understand what she means, so she decides not to press further. Soon after, Maxim enters the room and informs Frank and Veronica that the Vice Tower Master is looking for them. When they ask why, Maxim explains that Frank may have been summoned because of his training, while Veronica is likely being recognized for her contribution. Frank happily suggests they go together, while Veronica remains reluctant. Maxim then checks on Oscar's condition. After confirming that he is recovering well, he hands over the inner core of the Sky Silkworm to him. He also informs Oscar that the ownership of the silkworm thread has been assigned to him. Oscar is surprised, considering how valuable it is, but Maxim explains that this decision was made by the Vice Tower Master, and both he and Veronica support it. Veronica refuses any share, stating that she did not contribute much during the fight. Oscar accepts the reward and says he plans to consume the core to restore his mana. Maxim decides to stay and watch over him as he does so. As soon as Oscar consumes it, he focuses on controlling the energy within his body. Maxim observes carefully, knowing this is Oscar's first time using a refined elixir. He is impressed by how smoothly Oscar handles the surge of mana and cannot help but admire his talent. After some time, Oscar opens his eyes, looking much better than before. He thanks Maxim for staying with him so late. Maxim congratulates him on reaching level 3, and they talk for a while before Maxim leaves, allowing Oscar to rest. Now alone in his room, Oscar finds that he is not sleepy. He picks up his gun and decides to work on a spell that can reduce recoil damage. At the same time, at the mana plant, a man in a black suit carrying a briefcase arrives. A white tower mage tries to stop him, but the man ignores him and proceeds forward. He presents his identification, revealing himself as Nebula Grime from the Royal Ministry's Special Investigation Division. The mage examines the card and asks for the reason behind his visit. Nebula explains that they have been ordered to investigate the Sky Silkworm, as it is unusual for such a creature to appear so close to an urban area. He then requests the mage's cooperation. The White Tower mage agrees to cooperate, and Nebula begins his investigation. He uses the same technique as Oscar, allowing him to see the traces of mana left behind by mages. As he enters the mana plant, he quickly determines that 2 mages were involved in defeating the monster, one at level 2 and the other at level 4. The White Tower mage follows him closely, confirming the accuracy of his observations. They soon arrive at the mana chamber where the battle took place. By studying the traces, Nebula concludes that the level 4 mage started the fight. He notes that her speed was impressive, but she became nervous, which caused her movements to become restricted and led to her injury. Since Veronica is already injured, Nebula shifts his focus to the other mage. As he continues his analysis, he becomes surprised. The second mage moved with such precision that almost no mana traces were left behind. It is one of the cleanest battle scenes Nebula has ever seen, and he begins to wonder just how skilled that person must be. Looking further, he notices traces of bullet usage, but the trails suddenly end. When he looks upward, he concludes that the mage chased the Sky Silkworm into the sky. Nebula praises Veronica for her courage and asks the White Tower mage about the level 4 mage named Veronica. After hearing her name, he comments on her bright future. However, the White Tower mage corrects him and explains that it was actually the level 2 mage, Oscar, who defeated the monster. Nebula is shocked. He realizes that the minimal traces he observed were left by a level 2 mage. The name sounds familiar to him, and he soon remembers that this is the same Oscar who restored the cure for the Kadena flu. He also recognizes the bullet style, identifying it as belonging to Gunman Jack. This leads him to admire not only Oscar's control over mana, but also his physical ability. Curious to learn more, Nebula asks the White Tower mage to share everything he knows about Oscar. The scene then shifts to Oscar in the library, where he is trying to read. He quickly becomes disappointed, as the books there do not meet the standards expected of a mage tower. The White Tower Library was once a place that preserved centuries of magical knowledge and legendary texts. However, it has now been reduced to something similar to a basic school library. This realization makes Oscar feel saddened. So much knowledge has been lost over time, and he never expected that he would play a role in that loss. Still, he is certain that before the night of purge against Daiche 20 years ago, he had made copies of the library's contents and entrusted them to Edna Salaplis. The problem is that she is nowhere to be found. Knowing her character, Oscar is sure she would not disappear without fulfilling her promise, so he decides to search for her himself. Oscar sets a new goal to recover advanced spells that can push mages beyond their limits. Now that financial issues are no longer a concern, the potion department does not require his attention for the time being. While thinking about this, he asks the librarian for updated material on dragons from the past 20 years. The librarian tells him that such books are available and asks him to come closer. Oscar feels relieved, thinking that despite financial struggles, the White Tower has continued to gather knowledge. However, when the librarian brings out the books, they turn out to be simple stories and fairy tales. Since they are based on legends or loosely connected to real events, Oscar asks if there are any materials about real dragons. The librarian replies that such books can only be found in the Capital Library. Oscar feels disappointed, as such knowledge used to be widely available in the past. During their conversation, the librarian mentions a dragon named Edna, who fought alongside humans until the very end. She assumes that Edna may have followed her kind when they left. However, Oscar knows this is not true. According to old records, Edna was one of the most disappointed in her own kind. Realizing this, Oscar understands that he needs a different approach to find her. The next day, Fidenlina, Maxim, and the Vice Tower Master hold a meeting to review their finances, which have improved significantly. The Vice Master then asks about the morale of the young mages. Maxim explains that many have received offers from outside, but they have remained loyal. The Vice Master wants to reward them, but without recovering the lost high-level spells, the situation will not fully improve. They discuss the issue further and note that only basic spells are currently accessible. In the past, only Tower Masters had access to high-level magic. When Sasha became the Tower Master, she only had 6 spells available, even though there were originally 64 high-level spells, each considered a masterpiece. During the meeting, the Vice Master asks about Captain Chester and whether he plans to return. Maxim confirms that Chester will not come back until he completes his final mission. The Vice Master expresses disappointment, as his return would have brought access to more advanced magic. The discussion then shifts to a dangerous figure known as the Mage Hunter, who has appeared in the northern region. To prevent any trouble, Fidenlina suggests enforcing a curfew after 10 at night. This alarms Maxim, who reveals that Oscar has already left Serin and is heading toward Baron. They cannot contact him, as he may have already arrived. Hearing this, the Vice Tower Master immediately orders them to contact the Baron branch and instruct them to send Oscar back as soon as possible. They are deeply concerned for his safety, as despite his skill, he has only recently reached level 3 and still requires protection. The scene then shifts to Oscar, who has just arrived in Baron. He looks around and admires how much the city has changed, considering it was a wasteland 30 years ago. As he walks through the streets, he begins to wonder if he is heading in the right direction, as nothing looks familiar anymore. While he is walking, someone suddenly stops him and says that they have been waiting for him. Oscar is caught off guard when Killian suddenly says someone is looking for him. Right away, Oscar assumes it's the Blue Tower coming for revenge again, and after sensing Killian's mana, he realizes the guy is at least a level 4 mage. Oscar asks what happens if he refuses to go, but Killian calmly says then he'll have no choice but to drag him back by force. And bro was not joking. The second he finishes talking, Killian rushes forward and throws a brutal strike, but Oscar instantly creates a barrier to block it. Even so, the impact sends him sliding backward. That's when Oscar realizes this guy is seriously dangerous, because his shield got shattered by a simple kick without even using mana. Oscar quickly throws a kin toward Killian, and Killian just looks confused, wondering what Oscar is even trying to do, but the next second the kin explodes right in front of him and blasts him to the ground. Oscar wastes zero time, grabs Killian, and slams him hard into the floor, but somehow the guy gets back up completely unharmed. Now even Killian starts realizing Oscar isn't normal either, so he decides to stop holding back. In an instant, he bursts forward with insane speed, and this time Oscar can't dodge at all. The kick launches him straight into the wall, but even Killian looks shocked seeing Oscar survive it. Oscar just smirks and says it didn't even hurt. Killian replies that the next strike will finish everything, and both of them charge at each other at full speed. At that moment, Oscar uses a martial arts secret technique called Sound of the Waves. Killian gets confused because Oscar is literally punching empty air, but then the attack suddenly lands on him anyway, sending him flying into the wall before crashing to the ground badly injured. Completely stunned, Killian asks what kind of technique that was, and Oscar explains it's called resonance, a massive wave of wind that creates vibrations matching the target's internal frequency, causing the damage to hit from the inside. Killian can't believe how strong Oscar has become and says they've fought many times before. Oscar gets confused and asks where, and Killian replies that it was usually at the White Tower training grounds. Now Oscar is even more lost because he has no idea why Killian suddenly brought up the White Tower. So he finally asks who exactly Killian was searching for in the first place, and Killian answers with the name Hamel Grimwiz, the Vice Master of the White Tower. The second Oscar hears that name, he freezes. Killian then explains that Hamel heard rumors about a mage hunter appearing in the north, so he wanted Oscar to safely return. Oscar gets frustrated and asks why Killian didn't just say that from the start, but Killian casually replies that he already did. At that moment, Oscar realizes this man's communication skills are absolutely cooked. Still, something about Killian feels strangely familiar, so Oscar asks for his full identity. Killian proudly introduces himself as Killian Lockwood, a warrior of the Forest Tribe. The moment Oscar hears the surname Lockwood, he immediately asks if Killian knows Raiden Lockwood. Killian nods and says that's his father, the legendary White Tower mage known as the White Lion, and also one of Oscar Sage's closest companions. Raiden was an 8th level mage and a martial arts master from the Forest Tribe, and apparently his communication skills were just as terrible as his son's. That's when Oscar finally realizes the truth. He just beat up his best friend's son. But before things can get even more awkward, Killian suddenly says there's another problem. He had accepted a request before coming here, but because of his injuries, he can't complete it anymore. So now he wants Oscar to handle the mission in his place. Oscar points out that Hamel wanted him to return to Serin immediately, but Killian explains the cancellation fee for the request is insanely expensive. Feeling partly responsible for wrecking the guy, Oscar finally agrees and asks what the mission even is. Killian reveals that the request involves guarding the voice of heaven. The scene then shifts to a hotel, where Oscar arrives disguised as Killian. There, he meets Evelyn, the manager of Marin, the famous voice of heaven, and as they enter the room together, Oscar finally comes face to face with Marin herself. As they sit down, Maria thanks Oscar, who is disguised as Killian, for accepting the request without even hearing the full details first. She explains that she heard Killian has a commission success rate above 80%, so she expected him to be extremely picky with jobs. Oscar calmly replies that he's not the type to choose work based on convenience. While listening, Oscar remembers the information Killian gave him earlier. Marin became famous 3 years ago because of her unique voice that makes anyone listening feel calm and at peace, earning her the title Voice of Heaven. A little shyly, Marin suddenly asks if Killian is a responsible person, and Oscar confidently says yes. Hearing that instantly makes Marin smile with relief. A moment later, Evelyn walks in and says it's time to explain the real details of the commission. Her expression turns serious as she reveals that Oscar's job is to protect Marin from assassination attempts. Oscar is genuinely shocked hearing that. Evelyn explains that Marin has been receiving threats demanding she cancel her upcoming concert at Baron Dome. At first they ignored them, but eventually the threats turned into direct death letters. Oscar asks if they discovered who sent them, and Evelyn says yes. The culprit is supposedly Era, a rival singer who debuted 2 years before Marin, and her photo was even included with the letters. Oscar immediately points out that if the blackmailer is someone famous, couldn't they just expose everything publicly? But Evelyn says the situation isn't that simple. She explains that Baron's mayor died a few months ago, and Era's father is currently the leading candidate to become the next mayor. Because of that, most news outlets are already on their side, and would likely bury Marin's reports instead of helping her. Hearing this, Oscar realizes the problem is way bigger than he expected. This isn't some normal personal grudge anymore. So he asks Marin what Era could possibly gain from forcing her to cancel the concert. Marin explains that performers at Baron Dome earn the right to sing in front of the Emperor during the New Year festival, and only a handful of singers receive that honor every year. For someone in the music world, it's basically the biggest stage possible. This concert could completely change her life. After hearing all that, Oscar asks how many guards or mercenaries she hired besides him so he can plan properly, but Marin quietly says it's only him. She explains that every mercenary office refused her request the moment they learned who was involved. Oscar instantly realizes how bad the situation really is. A political family with that much influence would definitely hire assassins at least level 4 or higher, and he has no idea how many enemies could appear. And somehow, he's expected to handle all of this alone. At that point, Oscar asks how expensive the cancellation fee actually is, already thinking these conditions are way beyond reasonable. But suddenly Marin gets emotional and angrily asks how she could possibly cancel the concert after chasing this dream for 3 entire years. She even shouts that Oscar only came because he wanted the 1 million bells reward anyway. The second Oscar hears that amount, he realizes the cancellation fee must be insanely huge too. Marin, frustrated and disappointed, says she thought Killian was supposed to be responsible. But while she's yelling, Oscar suddenly notices her ears and finally realizes something shocking. Marin is a mermaid. In old legends, mermaids were known for their beauty and heavenly voices, but unlike the stories, real mermaids can transform their tails into human legs whenever they want, although only for a limited time. Still irritated, Marin asks if this is Oscar's first time seeing a mermaid, while Oscar quietly thinks that explains why there's literally a bathtub sitting in the middle of the room. Oscar then mentions that he heard mermaids suffer from severe homesickness if they stay too far from the ocean for too long. Evelyn explains that Marin is only half mermaid, which allows her to maintain a human form much longer and prevents the usual ocean sickness. Oscar looks surprised hearing that. Apparently, mermaids often entered political or strategic marriages with other races, but when they lived too far inland, many developed ocean homesickness, became seriously ill, and eventually died. Their children were often abandoned because neither humans nor mermaids fully accepted them. Hearing that backstory makes Oscar genuinely worried for Marin, but Marin quickly says both her parents are still alive. Even so, Oscar firmly says his answer is still no. If they continue with this concert, there's a very real chance Marin could die, and innocent audience members might get caught in danger too. Marin immediately replies that the audience will be protected because the seats are equipped with defensive artifacts, and even if her own life is at risk, she still refuses to abandon the concert. Evelyn quickly scolds her for talking so recklessly, but Marin says this has been her dream for 3 years, and she can't run away now after coming this far. Oscar then asks why she's so desperate to perform at Baron Dome specifically, and Marin finally reveals the truth. Her father was diagnosed with ocean homesickness years ago, and the doctors said he only had 5 years left to live. Now there's only 1 year remaining. There's no known cure for the illness, but rumors say a legendary elixir can heal it completely. To get that elixir, Marin must succeed within the next year, and that's why she absolutely cannot give up on this concert no matter what happens. Evelyn explains that if Marin successfully performs at Baron Dome, she'll earn the right to sing in front of the Emperor during the New Year festival, and as a reward, she can receive a single drop of the legendary elixir. The moment Oscar hears that, everything finally clicks for him. Now he understands why Marin became a singer in the first place. Meanwhile, Oscar quietly thinks about his own past. He grew up alone in the alleys without parents, but the desire to save someone important no matter the cost, that's something he understands better than anyone. Oscar then asks if they can enter Baron Dome immediately, and Evelyn says yes. Without wasting time, Oscar tells them they should leave right now because there's something he needs to test personally inside the arena. Before agreeing to protect Marin, he wants to confirm whether the audience will truly be safe. And if the security measures meet his standards, then nobody should regret Marin risking everything for this concert. Marin looks confused and asks what exactly he means, but Oscar simply says he'll give it a shot first. At the same time, the scene shifts to Era Sweet's mansion, where she receives news that Marin still hasn't canceled the concert. Her secretary then mentions something interesting. Marin was recently seen meeting with a man who appears to be her bodyguard. Era immediately gets annoyed because she already used her influence to block the mercenary offices from helping Marin, so she can't understand where this guard suddenly came from. She then orders her secretary to investigate his abilities immediately. Back at Baron Dome, Oscar carefully inspects the protection artifacts around the venue and finally says they're good enough. Hearing that, Marin instantly lights up with happiness when Oscar officially agrees to take the job. Oscar tells them they can finalize the contract once they return to the hotel, and Marin sweetly says she finally feels relieved because now she can perform without constantly worrying. Seeing her smile, Oscar quietly thinks that Marin really acts like an angel in public. But at that exact moment, Oscar senses two intruders hiding nearby. Without even changing expressions, he instantly fires wind bullets and silently takes both of them down before anyone notices. Oscar decides there's no reason to alarm Marin or Evelyn unnecessarily. Meanwhile, news of the failed attack reaches Era, and even she looks surprised after hearing both men were defeated instantly. Her secretary explains that the bodyguards were taken down with a single strike, meaning Marin's new guard is highly skilled. Hearing this, Era immediately orders the car to be prepared. Confused, the secretary asks where she's going, and Era calmly replies that she's going to meet the bodyguard herself, so she can hire him instead. The scene then shifts back to Marin's hotel room, where she's happily treating Oscar to food. Suddenly, the hotel manager enters the room, and Marin casually comments that the food tastes great, but then she freezes after seeing Era walk in behind him. Irritated, Marin immediately tells the manager this is supposed to be a private room. The manager nervously explains that Era insisted she only wanted to greet her junior as a fellow singer. But Marin clearly wants nothing to do with her and starts leaving instead. That's when Era suddenly tells Marin to leave the bodyguard behind if she's going. Marin instantly gets angry and asks why, already realizing what Era is trying to do. Era smiles and openly admits she wants Oscar to quit working for Marin and join her instead. She even offers to pay the contract penalty fee and promises 10 times the original payment. Marin immediately shouts that her guard would never fall for tricks like that. But then Oscar casually asks Era if she can really afford 10 million bells since his rate is supposedly 1 million. Era confidently says of course she can. But then Oscar smirks and explains that 1 million is only the deposit. The full contract actually costs 100 million bells, so can she guarantee the transfer? Hearing that instantly frustrates Era, and she asks if he's mocking her. Oscar smiles and straight up says yes. That answer makes her even more furious, but she forces herself to calm down before asking for his name. Oscar introduces himself using his disguise identity, Killian Lockwood. Before leaving, Era says she's looking forward to seeing him again, and Oscar smirks back saying likewise. That response annoys her even more as she storms out of the room. Outside, a man named Wu Jin comes to greet her. He's an assassin from Yin Country. Era asks about Dako, and Wu Jin replies that he's already carrying out orders. Wu Jin explains that the original plan was to eliminate Marin's manager during the concert and permanently silence Marin afterward, but now there's another obstacle they need to remove first. Marin's bodyguard, Killian Lockwood. Wu Jin asks when the mission should begin, and Era tells him to move immediately. Wu Jin explains that he already infiltrated the stage crew and will remain inside Baron Dome until tomorrow, while Dako has infiltrated the lighting team. Era coldly replies that she only cares about results, and swears she'll make Oscar regret rejecting her offer. But what Era doesn't know is that Oscar secretly heard the entire conversation through a spell he cast the moment they first met. Later that night, Oscar tells Marin to get proper rest since tomorrow is the concert and she needs to stay healthy. But Marin suddenly asks why he refused Era's offer when it was worth 10 million bells. Oscar asks if she really thinks he accepted the contract just for money, and Marin honestly says yes, especially since he couldn't even afford the cancellation fee earlier. Oscar then reminds her that she said she wanted to save her father, and he truly hopes she succeeds. He quietly admits that in his previous life, he never even got the chance to save his own master. That's why he believes Marin should do everything possible now, so she won't live with regrets later. Hearing those words genuinely moves Marin, and she softly thanks him. Finally, the scene shifts to the day of the concert. Huge crowds gather around Baron Dome, while staff members rush everywhere preparing for the performance. But hidden among them, Wu Jin quietly slips away from the group and coldly says, "It's time to begin." Jin quietly moves through the halls, planning to head upstairs and regroup with Dako, but the moment he steps out, he suddenly freezes. Standing right in front of him is Oscar. Jin instantly starts thinking about whether he should attack now while he still has the chance, but in the end, he decides it's smarter to stick to the original plan. But before he can leave, Oscar calmly points out that Jin has calluses on his fingertips instead of his palms, meaning he specializes in throwing weapons. Hearing that immediately shocks Jin because Oscar noticed him almost instantly. Now Jin starts hesitating again, wondering if he should regroup with Dako or strike first before things get worse. But Oscar doesn't give him time to think. In a flash, Oscar attacks. Jin realizes immediately that he can't dodge the hit in time, but somehow he barely manages to endure the blow. Then, in retaliation, Jin unleashes hundreds of poison-coated daggers toward Oscar at once. This time Oscar can't avoid them, and he crashes to the ground. Seeing that, Jin grins and proudly says he finally defeated a White Tower magician. He even mocks Oscar, saying he must have been some rookie mage after all. But just as Jin moves in for the finishing strike, he suddenly stops in shock. Oscar's entire body is covered in a wind barrier. Before Jin can react, Oscar calmly points his gun straight at him. Jin can't believe it, but the next second Oscar takes him down completely. The scene then shifts back to the concert itself, where Marin finally walks onto the stage and warmly greets the audience. At the same time, Dako waits in hiding for Jin to arrive. Eventually, he hears footsteps approaching and assumes it's his brother. Dako casually moves to open the door, but then the footsteps suddenly pass right by him. Confused, Dako wonders where Jin is even going. A moment later, he steps outside to call for him, only to find Oscar standing there instead. Oscar slowly turns around with a smile and says he finally found him. The second Dako sees Oscar alone, he instantly realizes the truth. Jin is dead. But instead of panicking, Dako calmly says this was supposed to be their final mission together. Oscar notices how strangely calm he is about his brother's death, but Dako simply replies that assassins already know their fate the moment they choose this life. Oscar then asks if Dako plans to retire after this job, since it was meant to be their last, but Dako says no. Apparently, he recently received an offer from one of the top organizations in the entire industry. Oscar replies that this is basically a battle between a mage and an assassin now, but Dako coldly says White Tower magicians aren't even the strongest anymore. That comment instantly irritates Oscar. Suddenly, Dako releases his aura throughout the surroundings, and hidden attacks instantly burst from the walls toward Oscar. Oscar barely dodges them in time, but Dako calmly explains that his poison works through contact alone, meaning Oscar is already finished. But Oscar casually replies that he already knew that from the beginning. Dako gets confused seeing how calm Oscar still is, and Oscar explains that the poison can't affect him because he's covering his entire body with mana to completely block outside air. Dako then asks how Oscar is even breathing, and Oscar reveals he's generating clean oxygen inside his own body using magic. Hearing that finally makes Dako acknowledge him as a genuinely skilled magician, and realizes defeating Jin wasn't luck at all. The next second, Oscar suddenly bursts forward using acceleration magic, rushing straight at Dako while aiming his gun for a direct hit. But just before Oscar fires, Dako instantly uses his aura to block the mana bullet from activating. Oscar is visibly stunned, and Dako grabs him while saying this must be the exact same technique Oscar used to defeat his brother. Dako suddenly lands a kick that sends Oscar crashing hard into the ground. Dako calmly says Oscar must be in serious pain right now, and the craziest part is that nobody in the audience has even noticed the battle happening backstage. But Oscar simply replies that it doesn't matter. He immediately fires 2 mana bullets, but Dako blocks both attacks and says the technique is useless against him. Then, out of nowhere, fireworks suddenly explode across the sky, and at the same time Marin shouts to the audience, telling everyone to cheer as loudly as possible. Hearing the crowd roar, Oscar smirks and says Marin remembered perfectly. In that instant, Oscar activates his technique, Soundbind, Noise Wave. A massive surge of pain suddenly hits Dako's head, forcing him onto one knee. Oscar explains that he gathered the voices of hundreds of thousands of people and slammed those sound waves into Dako like a bolt of lightning. Completely overwhelmed, Dako collapses to the ground, and Oscar instantly follows up with a wind bullet that finishes him in a single strike. As the fight ends, Oscar quietly thinks to himself that thankfully Marin followed the plan exactly. The scene then flashes back to rehearsal night, where Oscar explained they only needed to practice one thing. The moment Marin heard 2 gunshots during the concert, she needed to trigger the fireworks and get the audience screaming as loudly as possible. Returning to the present, Oscar says he's glad the setup worked, before proudly calling it the true skill of the greatest rookie in the business. The story then skips ahead 3 days later, where Marin is shocked seeing Oscar already walking around despite his injuries. Oscar casually says he feels great, and Marin reveals she even called a high priest to heal him. Oscar thanks her for the help, while Marin awkwardly admits things would have been really uncomfortable if he had actually died, especially since he was literally on the verge of death when they found him. Soon after, Evelyn arrives to settle the payment. She explains the total reward is 1.1 million berries, including an extra 100,000 as a thank you bonus. Without Oscar, Marin never would have had a chance to earn the Emperor's elixir. Oscar replies that everything was possible because Marin's determination was so strong, and now her father finally has hope of recovering soon. Marin then asks if Oscar plans to stay in the city, and Oscar says he still has some business left to handle. Marin warns him to be careful because Era is probably furious right now, and nobody knows what she might try next. Oscar calmly tells her not to worry about it. Then, with a playful smile, Marin suddenly asks if Oscar plans to keep hiding his real name forever. Oscar is caught off guard and asks what she means, but Marin reveals she noticed his colored contact lenses from the very beginning. Oscar looks surprised and asks why she trusted him anyway, and Marin softly says that when Oscar told her to save her father, the look in his eyes felt exactly like her own reflection. That's why she decided to trust him. Hearing that, Oscar laughs and says Marin really lives life without any plan at all. Finally, he reveals his real name, Oscar Cruziang. The moment Marin hears it, she says the name sounds familiar, and Evelyn quickly explains that Oscar is the White Tower genius who created the Cadena flu cure. Marin immediately thanks him once again for everything he's done. Meanwhile, at a hotel in Baron, Kaya Lockwood receives the news that both Dako and Wu Jin have been killed. Furious, she asks who did it, and her subordinates report that the killer was supposedly her brother, Killian Lockwood. But the moment Kaya sees the picture, she instantly realizes the man isn't actually her brother at all. That's when she understands someone has been impersonating Killian this whole time. Elsewhere, inside the Sweet family mansion, Mark Sweet, the head of the family, discusses the current situation in their territory with his secretary. Afterward, he asks who made his daughter cry, and his subordinate answers that it was Marin and her bodyguard, Killian Lockwood. Hearing that, Mark orders them to leave Marin alone because she's now connected to the Emperor through the concert. But when it comes to Killian, Mark coldly says to monitor his every move and report back immediately. He wants to personally teach him the price of disrespecting his daughter. At the same time, Kaya also declares that she's going to teach this fake Killian a lesson too. And meanwhile, completely unaware that 2 powerful groups are now targeting him, our boy Oscar peacefully sits down with the real Killian and casually drinks tea together.